I opened my eyes to freezing air and the frantic barking of dogs. My head throbbed. My second uncle stood over me, pulling me to my feet and shoving cold bullets into my hand. He yelled that our dogs had cornered the big one. Holding the cold bullets, my memories suddenly locked into place. I had somehow traveled back to the year 1985. We were at Liudogangto, hunting a massive wild boar. I looked ahead and saw more than 20 of our hunting dogs surrounding a monster we called Old Zoo. It was a giant 800-pound wild boar covered in thick, hardened mud that acted like heavy armor. I grabbed the old gun off my back and loaded a bullet. My body shook slightly as I thought of the family I had left behind in my previous life, hoping I could see them one last time. Our alpha dog, Big Black, was fiercely clamped onto the boar's throat. He held on tightly, dodging the crazed beast's attempts to shake him off. The rest of the pack darted in and out, biting at the boar's legs. Second uncle and I stood by, unable to fire our guns. The dogs were completely tangled with the beast. A gunshot could easily hit one of our dogs, and if the pack scattered, the boar would kill Big Black in seconds. Suddenly, a big yellow dog locked onto the boar's hind leg. The furious beast kicked it hard in the stomach. The brave dog kept its grip, panting and bleeding heavily. Seeing the dogs my father left me risking their lives made my blood boil. Unable to hold back, I drew my hunting knife and prepared to charge in. Before I could take a single step, second uncle tripped me from behind. I crashed hard to the ground. He scolded me fiercely, reminding me of the golden rule of hunting. We had to wait until the dogs brought the prey down completely. Stepping in early would only get us killed by the thrashing beast. His yelling snapped me back to reality. I took a deep breath and nodded. Second uncle pulled me up and handed back my dagger. He told me to wait for the exact moment the boar collapsed to step in and finish it. We watched the brutal fight continue. Finally, exhausted by the relentless pack, the massive beast crashed to the ground with a heavy thud. The dogs swarmed the fallen monster, and I made my move. Over 20 hunting dogs were pinned to the massive wild boar, tearing at its limbs and soft belly. Big Black still held tightly to the throat. I stepped forward with my short knife and drove it deep into the boar's neck. Blood squirted over my face as the giant beast thrashed to get back up. I pulled the blade down hard, slicing open a long gash. Blood gushed out, and after a few weak twitches, the beast finally died. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the snow. My body felt completely spent. Second uncle pulled me up and handed me a cheap cigarette. As I took a puff, the reality of my rebirth truly sank in. I joked about buying him better cigarettes once we sold the meat. Second uncle sliced open the boar's stomach, spilling its internal organs into the snow. In hunting, the dogs risk their lives, so they always get the fresh offal right away. The big yellow dog, though badly injured, limped forward to eat the heart before sitting near me. Second uncle hand-fed pieces of pig liver to Big Black. Almost all 27 dogs had sustained injuries, but thankfully, none were dead. Once the dogs finished eating and regained some strength, it was time to move the massive carcass. Second uncle estimated the wind would push the snow clouds away. We harnessed 8 of our strongest dogs with makeshift cloth saddles, tying ropes near the boar's front legs. Second uncle and I threw additional ropes over our shoulders, hauling the heavy load alongside the dogs. We took frequent breaks, and after 3 tiring hours, we finally made it out of the forest as the sun was setting. The snow-covered village looked peaceful, with smoke rising from earthen houses. When local dogs began to bark, our brave big yellow dog let out a loud roar from the hilltop, instantly shutting them all up. Looking at the yellow dog bathed in the golden sunset, second uncle and I felt a pang of sadness, knowing hunting dogs age far too quickly from all their physical toll. As we approached the edge of the village, an old man smoking a pipe walked out from a house and called out to welcome us back with our huge catch. We hauled our massive 800-pound wild boar to Grandpa Zhang's house at the edge of the village. Second uncle chopped off the pig's head with an axe as a gift for him. Grandpa Zhang tried to decline, but I insisted, joking that I was already 20 and didn't need to grow anymore. Hearing that, Grandpa Zhang offered to set me up with a local girl named Liu Jinhua. I instantly shuddered at the idea. In this life, I knew I only wanted to find my true love, Lin Yuezhi. When Grandpa Zhang asked what kind of woman I wanted, I declared that I wanted to marry a girl from the city. Second uncle scoffed, arguing a city girl wouldn't know how to farm, but I retorted that I would move to the city myself. We loaded the boar onto a sled, and our cow pulled it home while the hunting dogs ran alongside us. As night fell, we finally reached our courtyard. Seeing my mother and second aunt standing at the gate brought tears to my eyes. My mother noticed my teary face, which made second aunt assume second uncle had mistreated me. She immediately grabbed his ear and scolded him. I quickly explained that I was just hungry and overwhelmed with emotion, saving second uncle from further trouble. After dragging the boar into the yard, my mother and second aunt began boiling water to scrape the bristles, while second uncle and I sat down to eat. Over dinner, second uncle brought up Liu Jinhua again. I firmly refused, repeating my determination to find a city girl named Lin Yuezhi. Second uncle worried that a city girl couldn't handle farm life. I warned him that hunting wouldn't last forever and would eventually be banned, so relying solely on farming and hunting was not a long-term plan. Second uncle completely dismissed my prediction, but I knew the future would prove me right. Reflecting on my past life, I knew I went to the city in 1986, met Lin Yuezhi, and married her in 1987. This time, I wanted to speed up that timeline. To do that, I needed to make money, and a specific memory from 1985 came to mind. Back then, two wealthy southern businessmen came to the city in winter looking for high-quality wild ginseng to cure a relative, paying 11,000 yuan for a large root. I remembered my second uncle had harvested a wild ginseng root weighing over 300 grams that past autumn. Over dinner, I asked him for it. At first, he was hesitant, having saved it to make a nourishing soup for my mother. However, when I mentioned a rumor about southern buyers in the city, he agreed to let me try my luck, telling me I could keep the proceeds to help find a wife. I then asked second uncle if local collectors were holding any other large ginseng roots. He revealed that third brother Liu had a huge 3.7-ounce root that would cost around 800 yuan, while others held smaller 2-ounce roots. Knowing how much money the southern buyers were willing to pay, I realized this was an incredible opportunity. I urged second uncle to help me buy third brother Liu's ginseng after we sold the wild boar meat tomorrow. Second uncle looked at me suspiciously, surprised by my sudden drive for money, but he eventually agreed. He made me promise that if this venture failed, I would settle down to farm and hunt, and he insisted I consider meeting Liu Jinhua again. I agreed just to satisfy him, though my heart remained set on finding Lin Yuezhi in the city. Late that night, after finishing the boar prep, I talked to my mother. Though she worried the venture was too risky, she eventually gave in to my persistence. She pulled out 800 yuan from her savings handkerchief to fund the purchase. Holding the money in my pocket on the warm bed, listening to the howling wind outside, I felt ready to return to the city and reclaim my future. Early the next morning, second uncle and I loaded the wild boar meat onto our sled and headed to the village square. Because second aunt had already spread the word, villagers quickly gathered to buy meat. Since our wild boar was nice and fatty, the meat sold out fast at 50 cents a pound. By noon, we had made over 300 yuan. Second uncle took his fair share and handed the rest to me. After a quick lunch, second uncle took a piece of pork belly and led me to third brother Liu's house. Third brother Liu welcomed us inside and offered us tea. Second uncle got straight to the point and asked to buy the large wild ginseng root third brother Liu had harvested before the winter snows. Second uncle offered 800 yuan. Recognizing it as a very fair price, third brother Liu agreed without hesitation. He fetched a large roll of birch bark packed with moss and carefully opened it to reveal a thick, pristine ginseng root. It weighed about 3.6 taels, with its fine roots completely intact. I promptly paid him in 10 yuan bills. We carefully brought the valuable root back home. Once back, second uncle handed me his own harvested ginseng root as well. He looked at me sternly and urged me to stay on the right path, promising to support my ambitions as long as I remained honest. I reassured him that I would not let him down. Instead of waiting until the next day or driving a cattle sled, I decided to set out on foot immediately so I could reach the city by daybreak. Second aunt packed me some pancakes for the journey. I wrapped both precious ginseng roots in sheepskin, packed them into a makeshift backpack, and tucked my military knife into my waistband. As I walked out of the village, our lead dog Big Black followed me closely over 2 mountain ridges. I stopped in the snow, shared a pancake with him, and told him to go back home to guard the house and look after the pack. After a final look, Big Black ran back toward the village. With no reliable bus service available in town, I pushed forward on foot through the freezing night. Beneath the moonlit, snow-covered landscape, I marched steadily toward City B to secure my future. After walking all night, I finally arrived in City B at dawn. I grabbed a warm breakfast and booked a cheap room at a small hostel. After securing the door with a bedside table, I fell fast asleep. Later that afternoon, the landlady knocked to remind me of the time. Hostel safety was poor back then, so I remained cautious. During my second night at the hostel, I woke to the sound of someone picking the lock. I waited in the dark, grabbed the intruder's wrist as his hand reached through the crack, and pressed my knife against his skin. The thief quickly begged for mercy and fled once I let go, knowing I was not an easy target. Over the next 4 days, I staked out the government guest house from morning till night, waiting for the southern buyers old Joe had mentioned. By the end of the 4th day, without seeing them, I began to doubt if I had missed my chance or had the wrong location. Finally, on the 5th morning, I spotted 2 men in military overcoats stepping out of the guest house. I overheard them anxiously discussing their inability to find large wild ginseng for an ill relative back home. Approaching them cautiously, I casually mentioned that a clerk from the supply and marketing cooperative sent me because I possessed 2 large wild ginseng roots, over 2 ounces each. Their eyes lit up with hope, and they immediately invited me up to their room to escape the cold. Their room was modern and comfortable, complete with heating and a small television. I carefully unwrapped the sheepskin and birch bark, laying out my 2 high-quality wild ginseng roots. When the brothers, named Lai Xingwang and Lai Xingfu from Guangzhou, saw the roots, they could barely contain their excitement. The older brother tried to build quick rapport and offered me 15,000 yuan for both. Knowing from my past life that a single root of this quality was worth 11,000 yuan, I instantly saw through their attempt to lowball me. Without saying a single word, I packed up the ginseng and prepared to walk out. Seeing me pack up the ginseng, Lai Xingfu quickly stopped me to continue negotiating. His older brother, Lai Xingwang, offered me a premium Zhonghua cigarette, proving their family was exceptionally wealthy. I pushed for 50,000 yuan for both ginseng roots. After negotiating and checking their cash reserves, we agreed on 55,000 yuan. They opened a suitcase filled with brand new 10 yuan bills and counted out the payment. Before I left, they handed me their business card for future deals. I headed straight to the Rural Credit Cooperative to deposit 50,000 yuan. When I poured out the massive stack of cash from my woven bag, the suspicious teller quietly signaled her colleague to call the police, assuming I had stolen or robbed the money. A policeman arrived shortly after. I calmly explained that I earned the money by selling ginseng to 2 southern merchants, staying at room 308 of the guest house. The officer went to verify my story and returned 10 minutes later with an apology. With the misunderstanding cleared, I completed the deposit and safely tucked my new bankbook into my pocket. After enjoying a meal of braised mushrooms and pig's head meat, I walked toward the Forest Farm residential compound. Along the way, I spotted my old friend Lao Zhou chatting near the fire station. Arriving at the compound, I felt a wave of emotion staring at the brick houses. In my past life, I knew that in the winter of 1985, Lin Yuezhi's mother fell ill, and a colleague who paid for her treatment arranged an engagement between Lin Yuezhi and her son, Zhang Fan. I wondered how I should approach Lin Yuezhi this time, without startling her. As I stood there lost in thought, I suddenly heard a woman's angry voice shouting at Zhang Fan, threatening to chop him with a kitchen knife if he didn't back off. As I stepped out of the alley, my heart dropped at the sight of a man gripping Lin Yuezhi's arm. Seeing her clear distress, I immediately confronted him. After verifying she didn't know him as a boyfriend, I didn't hesitate. I launched a flying kick that sent him flying into a snowdrift. I stood protectively in front of Lin Yuezhi and as she looked at me, a soft blush covered her face. The bruised young man stumbled out of the snow, hurled threats, and ran off to call his friends. Lin Yueji anxiously urged me to run, warning that the local forest farm youths were tough. Looking at her familiar face brought emotional tears to my eyes, which clearly flustered her. I adjusted her wool scarf and gently reassured her to head home. She hesitated, but after I insisted, she ran back inside. I grabbed a stout wooden stick from a firewood pile and calmly waited. Moments later, the guy returned with 8 other young men carrying pickaxe handles. Relying on my strength and quick reflexes, I systematically knocked them down one by one, despite taking a few hits to my back. In no time, all 9 were groaning on the ground. Suddenly, Lin Yueji ran back out holding a meat cleaver, completely stunned to see the fight was already over. Blushing, she awkwardly claimed she was just looking for a knife sharpener, then invited me inside for water. Before we could move, the defeated young man climbed up and threatened her. He warned that if she brought me home, his mother would withhold the money promised for her mother's medical bills. That was when I realized he was her fiancé. Lin Yueji's face turned pale with distress. Seeing her on the verge of tears broke my heart, remembering how she had quietly carried her burdens in our past life. I stepped forward, scared the fiancé off, and looked gently at Lin Yueji, reassuring her not to worry because I had plenty of money to lend her. Lin Yueji looked at me helplessly. Her mother urgently needed surgery costing over 2,000 yuan, but they were 1,500 yuan short. Zhang Fan's family was using the money as leverage to force her into a marriage she didn't want. I reassured her not to worry and asked if 5,000 yuan would be enough. I pulled 5,000 yuan out of my woven bag, leaving both Lin Yueji and her mother completely stunned. I handed the cash directly to Lin Yueji. Her mother hesitated to accept such a massive sum from a stranger, but Lin Yueji blurted out that she would rather accept my help than marry Zhang Fan. Seeing how much better I was than Zhang Fan, her mother quietly accepted the situation. Lin Yueji served me hot water and pulled up a stool for me. When I mentioned that I needed to head back that afternoon, she looked visibly disappointed. Sitting in the room, Lin Yueji anxiously asked why I was willing to lend so much money to a stranger. I looked at her adorable, nervous expression and admitted that I couldn't stand seeing someone use her mother's illness to threaten her. She didn't quite believe me, so I asked if Zhang Fan offered her money, just so she would be with him. When she blushed and nodded, I looked her in the eye and confessed that my goal was the exact same as his. Lin Yueji's eyes widened in surprise, her face flushing with embarrassment. She playfully stomped on my shoe and gave a fierce look, making me pretend to be in pain until she burst out laughing. Watching us whisper and laugh together from the other room, her mother smiled softly, relieved that her daughter had found someone far better than Zhang Fan. As I prepared to leave, Lin Yueji shyly asked if I would stay for a meal first. I explained to Lin Yueji that I couldn't stay for lunch because I needed to buy supplies and head home to avoid paying for another night at a hotel. Touched by my frugality despite having handed her 5,000 yuan, she agreed. Before leaving, I had her write down paper and pen so I could give her my mailing address in Beigong village. She offered to write an IOU, but I smiled and turned it down. As we walked to the door, Lin Yueji grabbed my sleeve, blushing as she thanked me for saving her mother, and timidly warned me not to use money to force her into a relationship. I gently ruffled her hair, reassured her I wasn't that type of person, and said my goodbyes. In the city, I spent 10 yuan on malted milk powder, biscuits, and 2 cartons of Changbai Ginseng cigarettes for second uncle before beginning the long trek home on foot. The frozen Yalu River made for smooth walking, and by 3 a.m., I reached the village entrance, greeted warmly by Big Black. Back home, my mother was amazed by the treats I brought back, but she was even more stunned when I handed her my new bank book showing 50,000 yuan. Hearing the commotion, second uncle came over, worried I had gotten lost. When my mother showed him the bank book, he stared at the 50,000 yuan figure in total disbelief, realizing it would take 100 years of hunting to earn that much. Overwhelmed, second uncle excitedly declared he would help me find a wife after the new year, but I told him not to worry since I would find one myself. I handed him the cigarettes and malted milk powder I bought for him and offered to split the money in half. He refused the cash split, telling me to keep it all, then suggested we head out to set rabbit traps once the fresh snow stopped falling. The heavy snowfall finally stopped by morning, leaving a foot of fresh snow in the yard. I woke up early, shoveled the snow into a wheelbarrow, and dumped it in the front garden. Soon after, second uncle brought a bucket of warm soybean cakes and cornmeal to feed the heifer. He then prepared 2 large buckets of scalded cornmeal, cabbage, and potatoes for our 27 hunting dogs. After finishing the morning chores, I invited my mother over to second uncle's house for breakfast. Over fried pancakes and porridge, second aunt mentioned the ginseng money, advising me to save it for my future marriage and to help my younger brother when he graduates. I reassured her that I would always take good care of my brother. Around 7:30, second uncle and I hitched up the sled, took our lead dog Big Black, and set off into the deep snow. The snow in the forest was nearly a meter deep with a crusty top layer, making walking difficult. Our main goal for the day was to set wire snares for wild rabbits in the small woods on the sunny slope of the mountain, while keeping an eye out for larger game like red deer. Using guns for rabbits was impractical and expensive, so an experienced hunter like me only needed simple wire loops. Because rabbits naturally retrace their steps, finding their fresh tracks in the snow made trapping them straightforward. I located active rabbit paths, secured the wire loops to tree trunks between narrow gaps, and placed small branches on the sides to guide the rabbits straight into the snares. Following this method, I carefully set 10 rabbit traps along the clear trails. Shortly after I finished, second uncle met me at the bottom of the slope, having set 10 traps of his own in another timber grove. With the rabbit snares complete, we slung our guns over our shoulders and trekked toward the shady slope to check if the red deer herd had returned. Second uncle and I trekked through the deep, thigh-high snow, walking against the wind so animals wouldn't catch our scent. By noon, we still hadn't found any red deer tracks. We stopped to rest at a warm, snow-free patch in the forest, eating pancakes with pickled vegetables while Big Black munched on cornmeal. After resting, second uncle sent Big Black ahead to scout for deer. When Big Black returned empty-handed an hour later, second uncle concluded the deer herd had moved elsewhere. I suggested we hunt some pheasants and hazel grouse before heading home. While wild rabbits only sell for yuan and have a strong gamey taste, birds like grouse fetch 2 to 3 yuan and taste amazing due to their pine nut diet. I led Big Black into the pine forest. Soon, I spotted a beautiful Eurasian jay perched on a yellow pine. I raised my broken-handle rifle, aimed, and pulled the trigger. The loud gunshot echoed through the trees, and the bird dropped straight down. Big Black dashed forward and dutifully brought the bird back to my hand. Moving further into the woods, I used a shotgun shell filled with steel balls to easily take down a larger tree chicken. After circling out of the forest, Big Black spotted a pheasant hiding in a nearby bush. Wild pheasants are notoriously lazy in winter and often think they are well hidden. I gave Big Black a signal. The smart dog crept forward like a secret agent. Just as the pheasant spread its wings to take off, Big Black predicted its movement, leaped high into the air, and caught it mid-flight with a sharp snap of its jaws. Big Black ran back proudly to hand over the pheasant, wagging his tail for praise. But just as I was petting him, 2 sudden gunshots echoed nearby, and my heart sank. Something was wrong. Hearing 2 quick gunshots in the distance, I knew second uncle must have run into a dangerous situation. Firing 2 shots so fast meant he had switched to a heavy single bullet. I reloaded single-shot rounds as I sprinted through the deep snow, shouting ahead to make sure he was all right. Big Black had already dashed far ahead of me, barking ferociously. Second uncle shouted back that he had been ambushed by a wild lynx, also known as a mountain fox. These fierce feline predators grow large and can easily overpower a dog. Usually, they avoid humans, unless previously injured by another hunter. Second uncle had been forced up a crooked tree to escape its attack, leaving his rifle on the ground. By the time I reached the foot of the slope, Big Black and the large lynx were already locked in a vicious fight. I slid down the snowy incline and fired a shot into the air. The loud noise distracted the lynx, giving Big Black the chance to grab it by the back of its thick neck. However, the agile beast twisted around and slashed Big Black with its sharp claws. The injured lynx then charged straight at me across the snow. I quickly raised my shotgun, took steady aim, and fired. The shot shattered one of the lynx's hind legs, sending it rolling in pain across the snowbank. Before it could recover, Big Black pounced on it again. The desperate lynx bit directly into Big Black's neck, but the spiked cowhide collar we had made for Big Black protected him, driving metal screws into the lynx's mouth. Bleeding heavily, Big Black went completely feral. He kicked the beast off, then lunged back in like a black bolt of lightning, locking his jaws firmly around the lynx's throat. The two animals rolled together in the bloody snow. Big Black refused to let go, ignoring the lynx's thrashing claws. After a grueling few minutes, the lynx finally went limp and stopped breathing. Staggering to his feet, Big Black wagged his tail toward us. Heartbroken by his injuries, I carefully removed his spiked collar and applied healing powder to his wounds. Second Uncle turned over the fallen lynx's body, amazed by the sheer size and ferocity of the beast. Second Uncle dragged the dead mountain fox over and showed me its left eye. It had been blinded by iron shot, and its pelt was damaged from old wounds. Other hunters had clearly shot it before, which explained why it was so aggressively attacking humans. Sitting down in the snow with a cigarette, I teasingly commended Second Uncle for leaping 3 meters up a tree in his heavy winter clothes. He laughed it off, admitting he was getting older and couldn't fight large animals like he used to when he was 20. Our conversation shifted to my late father. Second Uncle recalled how my father was a master with a long whip, once taking down a black bear with it. Later, my father joined the military, became a bodyguard, and sacrificed his life taking a bullet for his regimental commander. I already knew that the commander my father saved had eventually become the municipal party secretary in City B. In my past life, Second Uncle had used my father's military medals and a photo with the secretary to bail me out after a major fight. This time, I was determined to use that connection ahead of time to build my future. I told Second Uncle about the secretary's current position and expressed my desire to leave the village to seek him out. Second Uncle gave me his full support. He acknowledged that the world was changing rapidly and that the days of hunting and using food coupons were coming to an end. He reminded me to always stay righteous, kind, and true to my father's honorable legacy. He advised me to hunt some good wild game and gather mushrooms to bring as a respectful gift when visiting the secretary before the new year. After finishing our talk, we headed over to check our rabbit snares on Yang Slope. Out of the 10 traps I had set, 6 had successfully caught wild rabbits. Soon, Second Uncle met up with me, carrying his own heavy haul as the sun began to set. I told Second Uncle that I caught 6 rabbits, adding to his 4, plus the pheasants we got today. He joked that our daily haul was almost equal to a forest farm employee's monthly salary and expressed his wish that I would buy a Jeep to show off someday. I teased back that I would bring home a Mercedes-Benz instead. When we returned home, Second Uncle fed Big Black a piece of thawed meat. He fondly recalled how Big Black's mother was an old hunting dog that mated with a wild lone wolf, producing Big Black. Big Black grew exceptionally fast and intelligent, becoming as massive and capable as our giant yellow hunting dog, Big Yellow. By December 10th, we spent over a week tracking red deer herds without success. With Forest Farm expanding its logging operations, wild animals were driven deeper into the mountains. Catching fewer animals made Second Uncle realize that my previous warnings about the decline of hunting were coming true. Upon returning from the market, my mother told me that Pillar dropped off a letter addressed to me. I was curious because I rarely received mail. Looking at the beautiful, familiar handwriting on the envelope sent from City B, I instantly recognized it as Lin Yueji's. My mother chuckled, suspecting I had a secret sweetheart. I opened the envelope and found 2 densely written pages. Lin Yueji shared that her mother successfully had her surgery just 3 days after I left. My sudden arrival and financial help had completely disrupted the marriage arrangement her mother had, originally planned with Zhang Fan's family on that very day, altering our destinies for the better. 8 days after sending her letter, Lin Yueji's words finally reached me. She shared details about her daily life at the hospital, like the price of wontons and the overheated rooms, ending her letter by asking when I would visit the city. After calculating the time, I realized her mother was still recovering in the hospital. I told my mother I was heading to City B for 10 days to visit friends, which made her tease me about going to see my future bride. I hurried to second uncle's house to pick up a basket filled with dried mushrooms and wild game as gifts. At 3 in the afternoon, carrying 70 yuan from my recent trap sales and the heavy basket, I set off. By 5 o'clock, I managed to hitch a ride on a timber truck heading toward Dan City. I offered the driver a pack of cigarettes, and we hit it off, discovering we shared mutual acquaintances from my village. The truck drove smoothly over the frozen river. Around midnight near City B, the driver stopped on the ice. He stepped out with a flashlight to meet contacts on the frozen river. He traded a valuable leopard skin for a large box of North Korean cigarettes and liquor. I helped him haul the heavy cargo into the back of the truck. He explained that trading these imported cigarettes in the city would bring him a nice profit. By 1 in the morning, the driver dropped me off near the center of City B, refusing to take back the cigarettes I had gifted him. He drove off into the night. I walked through the darkness back to the familiar small hostel I had stayed at before and knocked on the locked door. The landlady put on her coat, opened the curtain, and smirked through the glass as she recognized me. I arrived back at the small hotel late at night. The owner, a woman in her 30s named Xia, welcomed me warmly and handed me a thermos of hot water. Unknown to me, Xia was working with a gang of local thieves. Shortly after I went to my room, she walked to the back building and informed 5 thieves, including a guy nicknamed Monkey, that I was the person who had deposited 50,000 yuan last month. Monkey remembered how tough I was from his previous attempt to pick my lock, but pressured by Xia, the gang agreed to rob me using dirtier methods. As a seasoned hunter, I remained a light sleeper and blocked my door with a table. Hearing the zipper sound outside, I immediately woke up and grabbed my military knife. When a hand reached around the doorframe to move the table, I kicked the heavy door shut with full force, breaking Monkey's wrist. As he screamed in agony, his accomplices kicked the door wide open. Reacting instantly, I took a short running start and delivered a flying knee strike into the chest of the largest thief at the front. The force sent him flying backward into 2 companions behind him. Before the remaining gang members could react, I grabbed Monkey by his hair, dragged him into my room, and pointed my knife at another thief to keep him back. Inside the room, I grabbed Monkey's head with both hands and repeatedly slammed it against the wooden table until he went completely limp and covered in blood. The 4 stunned thieves watched in sheer terror as I let Monkey collapse to the floor like a rag doll. I thrust my military knife deep into the wooden table, lit a cigarette, and glared at the trembling men, telling them it was time to make their move. In times like these, you either have money and power, or you have to be ruthless. I wasn't rich yet, but when it came to being ruthless, I feared no one. The thieves realized I was far too dangerous to mess with and backed down, claiming they were only after money, not lives. I mocked their weakness, reminding them that they had broken the rules first by coming back for me. To teach them a permanent lesson and make them fear me, I held Monkey's broken right hand against the table, raised my military knife, and chopped off a section of his index finger. Monkey screamed in agony and collapsed to the floor, now permanently crippled. The hotel landlady, Xia, watched with a dark expression, admitting defeat this time but warning me to watch my back in City B. I ignored her threats, picked up my bag, and walked out into the snowy night. After I left, Xia refused to help Monkey or loan him money for the hospital, since he was no longer useful to her, leaving the crippled thief bitter and filled with regret for targeting me again. I walked through the dark, snowy streets until I reached the municipal guest house. The night watchman initially said it was too late to check in, but after I slipped him 5 yuan, he called the front desk clerk. The clerk complained about the late hour, but when I passed my ID card with 2 extra yuan hidden underneath, she quickly agreed to check me in. She gave me a 20 yuan room equipped with a telephone, where I finally settled in safely for the night. I decided to pay for a luxury room at the state-run guest house for 2 days. It was expensive, but it included a private bathroom, a television, and a telephone, which made it worth every cent. After settling my room deposit, I fell asleep until 9 the next morning. I washed up and went directly to the department store, spending my remaining 10 yuan on health products, milk powder, sugar, and fresh apples as gifts. Carrying the bags, I headed straight to the Municipal People's Hospital to visit Lin Yueji's mother. Seeing me enter with so many gifts, Lin Yueji was pleasantly surprised, though she chided me for spending so much money. Her mother was recovering well and was delighted by my visit, even suggesting that I bring my mother over for a visit once she recovered, which made Lin Yueji blush furiously. Lin Yueji handed me 3 envelopes containing 3,500 yuan from the 5,000 I had previously lent them, keeping the rest for living expenses since her mother's surgery had only cost 2,000. I accepted the returned funds and put them into my backpack. When her mother kindly suggested that I stay at their house instead of wasting money on a guest house, I politely declined, explaining that I needed to use the telephone at the guest house to make some calls over the next couple of days. While we were talking, my stomach let out a loud growl. Lin Yueji smiled and offered to take me downstairs for wontons. Her mother urged us to go ahead, happily watching us leave together. As we stepped out into the chilly air, Lin Yueji noticed I wasn't wearing a scarf and gently nagged me. She then brought up her recent letter, complaining about the expensive wonton stall near the hospital, and suggesting a cheaper one down the street instead. When I teased her by saying I had memorized every single word she wrote, she stiffened in embarrassment, her face flushing red as she secretly cursed my playful boldness. Lin Yueji led me to a small, affordable wonton shop down the street. The wontons were delicious, and she proudly pointed out how much cheaper they were than the 50-cent ones near the hospital. As we ate, she asked about my line of work. I explained that my family gathers wild mushrooms in the warmer months and hunts in the winter. She was curious about my income, so I revealed that I was the country youth everyone in the city was currently talking about. The one who recently sold 2 wild ginseng roots to a southern merchant for 55,000 yuan. Lin Yueji was completely stunned, realizing that 50,000 yuan was more than most people could earn in a lifetime. Seeing her frozen in shock, I jokingly offered to give all the money to her. That made her blush, though she quickly turned it down, insisting I should save it to find a wife. When I teased her about coming home with me, her smile faded and tears filled her eyes. She felt humiliated, assuming I was using the money to pressure her. Seeing her distress broke my heart, so I quickly reassured her that I was only joking. Once she calmed down, I shared my plans to use the 50,000 yuan to start a clothing business selling cheap jeans, dacron tops, and chiffon shirts before the new year. Lin Yueji worried that I would get scammed by sending money south through the post office without inspecting the goods myself. Confident in my plan, I proposed a wager. I promised that if I managed to earn another 50,000 yuan before the new year, she would come home with me in the spring so I could take her up the mountain to dig for wild ginseng. Flustered and heart-pounding, she accepted the bet. After leaving the wonton shop, I said goodbye to Lin Yueji so she could return to the hospital. I then went straight to the credit union to request a withdrawal of 50,000 yuan, which the manager scheduled for 2 days later. Returning to the guest house, I placed a long-distance call to Lai Xingwang in Guangzhou. After exchanging pleasantries, I told him I wanted to buy a large order of clothes using my entire 50,000 yuan. Lai Xingwang was stunned by my bold decision, realizing I was a serious businessman. To secure an exclusive distribution agreement for the 3 northeastern provinces, I made a daring promise. I offered to sign a legally binding contract, guaranteeing I would purchase 5 million yuan worth of clothing from his factory by the end of next year, risking a lawsuit if I failed. Overwhelmed by such a massive commitment, Lai Xingwang agreed to my terms. He offered me incredibly low wholesale prices, 3 yuan and 50 cents for jeans, 4 yuan and 50 cents for chiffon tops, and 3 yuan and 50 cents for dacron tops, with his factory covering all shipping costs. I immediately ordered 11,000 pairs of jeans, along with an equal mix of chiffon and dacron tops, to fill the rest of the 50,000 yuan order. I promised to wire the funds in 2 days. After hanging up, I lit a cigarette, thrilled by the massive profit margins. While individual vendors spent time and money traveling south for small batches, I was positioning myself as the master wholesaler for the entire region. Even Lai Xingwang was left shaking his head in disbelief, amazed by my daring ambition. In Guangzhou, Lai Xingwang excitedly told his younger brother, Lai Xingfu, about the contract he made with me. Xingfu was initially outraged by the low wholesale prices, but Xingwang convinced him that my guaranteed 5 million yuan annual volume would elevate their factory's brand reputation across China. Xingwang decided to send Xingfu to deliver the goods personally and gift me a display pager to make communication easier. Meanwhile, I bought malted milk powder and fruit milk powder in City B, slung a bag of wild mushrooms over my shoulder, and headed to the municipal party committee courtyard. After registering at the gate, I entered a small courtyard where Secretary Fu was waiting in his military overcoat. He recognized me as Ningwei's son, greeted me warmly with tears in his eyes, and ushered me inside. Mrs. Fu came out from the kitchen with a spatula, welcoming me warmly and insisting I stay for dinner. They were generous, educated, and deeply grateful to my father for saving Secretary Fu's life. Secretary Fu fondly complained that my second uncle was always too stubborn to visit properly or accept help, fearing what others might say. I noticed a stark contrast in Secretary Fu's warmth compared to my past life. In my previous life, after he bailed me out of trouble, an invisible distance remained between us. Now, he treated me like a close, talkative elder. When I mentioned that I planned to start doing business in the city next year, his eyes flickered with keen interest as he asked me more about it. When Secretary Fu asked about my plans, I explained that I earned 55,000 yuan by selling 2 wild ginseng roots last month. I shared my idea to act as an exclusive regional agent for southern clothing factories, wholesaling items directly to local vendors so they wouldn't have to travel far. Secretary Fu offered to secure me a space in the state-owned department store, but I politely declined, explaining that renting a small factory for wholesale operations suited my goals much better. He respected my decision and promised to help keep an eye out for a suitable venue. Secretary Fu handed me a Changhua cigarette, and we discussed the country's economic trends. I pointed out that while food prices were rising, workers' wages remained stagnant. I also mentioned the emerging housing reforms, predicting that a wave of old city renovation projects would soon sweep across the country. I explained that my goal was to accumulate enough capital over the next 2 years to participate in these development projects. Hearing my detailed analysis, Secretary Fu's expression turned serious. What I described aligned perfectly with confidential plans he had recently received, which marked our city as an early pilot area for urban renovation. Impressed that I had deducted all of this simply from newspapers and the radio, Secretary Fu praised my foresight and encouraged me to work hard and build up my capital. Just then, his son Fu Jianye walked into the room. Secretary Fu introduced us, encouraging Fu Jianye to spend more time with me. Fu Jianye was surprised to hear his strict father praise a young man from the countryside so highly, and he immediately became curious about my vision for the future. Fu Jianye was intrigued by my conversation with his father and asked me to share my thoughts on business. I repeated my perspective on market trends and urban renovation. He was deeply impressed by my bold vision and sharp foresight, appreciating that I was willing to commit 50,000 yuan to back my ideas. Recognizing my ambition, he offered to help me secure a location for my business. He mentioned that the old agricultural machinery factory had been vacant since merging with another factory in October. It was the perfect size to serve as my warehouse and operational base. Fu Jianye promised to take me there the following morning at 9 o'clock to inspect the site and help me secure a business license. Overwhelmed with gratitude, I thanked him warmly. After dinner, I pretended to be slightly tipsy and left the compound, feeling thrilled that everything was falling into place so smoothly. After I departed, Fu Jianye discussed me with Secretary Fu. They both agreed I was exceptionally sharp, tactful, and resourceful. Because my father had saved Secretary Fu's life, Fu Jianye decided to form a genuine connection with me and offer his full support to help me succeed. The next morning at 7, I visited Lin Yueji and her mother at the hospital. I shared the good news that my business deal was moving forward and that I was on my way to inspect a factory space. Lin's mother encouraged Lin Yueji to leave the hospital and accompany me for the day, noting that another relative was coming to keep her company. Although Lin Yueji secretly wanted to spend time with me, she playfully put on a reluctant front, pretending it was a chore as she bundled up in her winter clothes. I smiled at her adorable act, and together we stepped out into the cold morning, heading first toward the Municipal Party Committee courtyard to meet Fujianye. As we walked toward the Municipal Party Committee courtyard, Lin Yueji suddenly stopped and pulled a watch box out of her pocket, awkwardly handing it to me. It was a domestic Shanghai brand watch worth 116 yuan, about 3 months of her salary. Seeing my playful confusion about how to wear it, she blushed, took my wrist, and fastened the watch for me. I promised to buy her a nicer watch once my business made money, which made her blush even deeper as we continued walking. We reached the courtyard entrance before 9. When Lin Yueji nervously asked about my connection to the area, I leaned in and whispered that Secretary Fu was my relative. My gentle breath on her ear made her mind go blank with embarrassment, prompting her to give me a playful slap on the arm. Moments later, Fujianye drove up in his jeep. Seeing Lin Yueji bundled up in her winter gear, he mistook her for my girlfriend and teased us. Lin Yueji hesitated to join us, realizing Fujianye was her direct boss at Forest Farm, but I gently pulled her along into the vehicle. Once inside, Fujianye asked about her workplace. Realizing she couldn't hide her identity, Lin Yueji unwrapped her scarf and greeted her section chief. Fujianye slammed on the brakes in shock, recognizing her as the famous farm beauty. He burst into laughter, connecting the dots that I was the guy who had recently beaten up Zhang Fan and his friends at the compound. Fujianye gave me a thumbs up for sweeping the farm beauty off her feet, while Lin Yueji shyly claimed we were just ordinary friends. Seeing his amused reaction, I playfully raised my wrist and asked Fujianye how he knew the brand new watch I was wearing was a gift from Lin Yueji. Fujianye drove us to the old agricultural machinery factory. An elderly worker unlocked the gate, revealing an 800-square-meter yard, 2 factory buildings, and a small 2-story office. Since local farmers fixed their own equipment, the repair shop had become redundant. We met with factory director Yang in his second-floor office. Seeing Lin Yueji by my side, Director Yang assumed she was my wife and complimented her beauty. I happily agreed, and Lin Yueji silently went along with it to save face for me. We got straight down to business. I proposed renting the entire property for 20 years. After some friendly bargaining, we agreed on a rate of 340 yuan per year. I paid a deposit of 1,020 yuan for the first 3 years, promising to settle the remaining balance before May. I specifically requested a clause, giving me the right of first refusal if the factory land were ever sold or renovated in the future, and Director Yang readily stamped the official agreement. After signing the contract, Fujianye drove us to a North Korean restaurant for a hearty meal of dog meat soup, pork belly, and tofu. Lin Yueji sat attentively beside me, pouring tea and serving drinks, which made Fujianye deeply envious. After dropping Director Yang off, Fujianye accompanied us to the Industry and Commerce Bureau. With his connections, I easily filed the paperwork for a sole proprietorship business license, set to be picked up the next day. Fujianye dropped Lin Yueji and me off at the guest house and drove away. Fueled by alcohol and looking at Lin Yueji's flushed face, my heart raced. I looked deeply into her eyes and gently asked if she wanted to come upstairs to my room for a while. Lin Yueji hesitated outside the guest house, feeling panicked about moving too fast. Seeing her pleading expression, I smiled and reassured her. I only meant to offer her a drink of water. Relieved, she let me walk her back to the hospital. Along the way, she shyly questioned my intentions, and when I teased that she was my girlfriend, she playfully called me shameless with a bright smile. After dropping her off, I walked back through the snowy streets alone. Back in the hospital ward, Lin Yueji chatted with her mother and Aunt Zhang, admitting that I had rented the entire agricultural machinery factory. She also asked Aunt Zhang to teach her how to knit a large button sweater, blushing as Aunt Zhang teased her about making it for a boyfriend. I slept until 4:30 in the afternoon, and then took a walk through the chilly city. The sunset, falling snow, and distant folk songs created a picturesque scene as I strolled toward the fire station. There, I spotted my old friend Joe Bin, known locally as Fat Joe, sitting on a cart with a few other men waiting for work. I approached the group, handed out Changbei Ginseng cigarettes, and mentioned that I needed help hauling a large shipment in a few days. Joe Bin's eyes lit up when I told him the shipment was nearly 30,000 caddies of fabric and clothing to be moved to the agricultural machinery factory. I told him I wanted to hire his entire cart team exclusively for the job, offering to hand all my future transport needs over to him as well. When Joe Bin asked why I was trusting him so readily on our first meeting, I simply told him I liked his character and wanted to be friends. Joe Bin agreed to a rate of 20 yuan per 10,000 caddies. However, seeing me stare at him with intense nostalgia, he felt thoroughly unsettled, took a nervous step back, and yelled at me to stop looking at him like he was crazy. After finalizing my transport deal with Joe Bin, I walked back toward the guest house as night fell. Near the entrance, I spotted more than a dozen men waiting in the dark with weapons. The leader stepped into the light, demanding to know if I was Ning Jie. I recognized his voice immediately. It was Lai the Toad, a notorious local gangster and clothing dealer from my past life. He claimed I had wrecked his girlfriend Xia's hotel and demanded 20,000 yuan, threatening to break my leg if I refused. Knowing that dealing with local thugs required absolute ruthlessness, I refused his demand and invited him to try and take the money himself. Lai the Toad signaled his thugs to charge at me with heavy oak pickaxe handles. Instead of wasting time fighting his henchmen, I focused entirely on taking down the leader. I dodged the initial strikes, launched a flying knee at the first thug, and grabbed another by the waist to use as a human shield against incoming hits. As the thugs accidentally struck their own man, a gap opened up in their line. Standing a few meters away, Lai the Toad assumed his men would overpower me, confident in his own fighting reputation. However, before he could even react, I closed the distance like a flash and clamped my left hand tightly around his neck, choking off his air. As his thugs panicked and yelled for me to let him go, I pulled my military knife with my right hand and drove it straight into Lai the Toad's thigh, leaving him gasping in shock and pain. Lai the Toad and his henchmen were completely stunned by my ruthless attack. Unlike other fighters who traded threats first, I went straight for the kill. Knowing we would be business rivals in the clothing market anyway, I didn't hold back. As blood soaked through Lai the Toad's trousers, he gritted his teeth, refusing to scream. I made it crystal clear to him. I was a nobody with nothing to lose, while he was a prominent local boss. If he tried to ruin me, I wouldn't hesitate to take his life the next time we met. When he tried to utter a threat, I immediately drove my knife into his other leg, causing him to howl in pain. Trembling, he admitted defeat with the words, "I give up." I kicked him aside and watched as his panicking henchmen carried him away toward the hospital. Returning to the guest house, the staff looked at me with newfound fear and respect. The young receptionist was exceptionally attentive, but I politely declined her implied offers and went up to my room to rest. I knew Lai the Toad's petty and vengeful nature meant he wouldn't forgive me easily. But these 2 stabs would certainly keep him quiet until after the new year. The next morning, I withdrew the 50,000 yuan from the credit union and wired it to Lai Xingwang at the post office. I then called Lai Xingwang to confirm the transfer. Touched by my speed, he promised to ship the clothing batch out the very next day. With all my major business tasks completed, I strolled over to the hospital. Lin's mother was recovering well. As I entered the ward, Lin Yuezhi put down her knitting and looked at me with a cute, troubled expression, silently complaining about my tall stature as she worked on her sweater. Before heading back to my village, I visited Lin's mother at the hospital. She was recovering well and expecting to be discharged in 2 days. Lin Yuezhi was clearly upset that I was leaving, but her mood brightened when I promised to return in 3 to 5 days with fresh game, like frogs and hazel grouse. Lin Yuezhi even offered to knit a custom sweater for me, so I wouldn't have to buy an uncomfortable one from the department store. After leaving the hospital, Lin Yuezhi accompanied me to Fu Jianye's office at Forest Farm. I told Fu Jianye that I was heading home to the village for a few days to hunt some wild game for Secretary Fu. When I mentioned needing a reliable vehicle like a Jeep 212 for my growing business next year, Fu Jianye offered to lend me his, but I insisted on buying one instead. After we had lunch together, Fu Jianye drove Lin Yuezhi and me to my local town. We arrived around nightfall, and I said goodbye to them before heading up the snow-covered mountain path on foot. The moonlit night illuminated the dark mountain trails and distant village lights below. Reaching the mountain ridge, I cupped my hands around my mouth and shouted Big Black's name into the cold night air. Deep in our courtyard shed, Big Black immediately opened his eyes and dashed out to greet me. Using a plastic sheet to slide down the snowy hillside, I made a swift descent down the mountain, though I flipped into snowdrifts a few times along the way. Big Black ran up to meet me, and together we reached my home in about 20 minutes. My mother turned on the light and listened happily as I shared my progress in the city. I handed over the gifts Lin Yuezhi had bought for our family, and my mother was delighted by the girl's thoughtfulness. I explained that I wouldn't be able to come home for the upcoming Chinese New Year due to my new business venture. When I mentioned that Lin Yuezhi was knitting me a sweater, my mother smiled and told me to bring it home after the New Year. The next morning, I delivered Lin Yuezhi's gifts to my second aunt. Shortly after, second uncle and I went back up the mountain to hunt, accompanied by Big Black and Big Yellow. Over the next 3 days, we secured a solid haul of wild game and rabbits. While second uncle took most of the game to sell in town, I set out to catch wild frogs near an unfrozen river section at the east end of the village. Stepping into the shallow, misty water, I flipped over rocks and gathered half a bag of large female frogs filled with eggs. After leaving some for my mother and second aunt, I packed my bag and prepared to head back to the city. Unbeknownst to me, my violent encounter with Lai the Toad had sent shockwaves through the local underworld. In City B, wild rumors circulated about my fight against 13 men, exaggerating my height, claiming I used magic, and ridiculous stories that my butt emitted blue light and I breathed fire. While local bosses laughed off the wild rumors, key figures took note. Zhou Bin respected my ruthless nature and felt glad to be on friendly terms with me. Meanwhile, Fu Jianye was thoroughly impressed by my toughness, eager to see just how far his new younger brother could go in the city. I arrived in the city around 3 in the morning after missing the bus, resting until 6:30 before heading straight to Lin Yuezhi's house with bags of wild game. Lin Yuezhi ran to open the door, her face lighting up with relief when she saw me. I greeted her mother, who was recovering well despite her itching surgical incision. I unpacked a basket of gifts for Secretary Fu and brought out a large bag of mountain frogs and hazel grouse I had caught specifically for Lin Yuezhi and her mother. Lin Yuezhi worried about my cold journey and insisted I stay at her house to sleep instead of wasting money at a guest house. She offered her own room for the night while she slept with her mother. She washed my wet socks, warmed my shoes on the stove, provided hot water for my feet, and spread out a warm quilt. I ate a quick bowl of noodles she prepared and immediately drifted off into a deep, exhausted sleep. Before leaving for work at Forest Farm, Lin Yuezhi gently instructed her mother to keep the house quiet so I could rest. Her mother teased her about acting like a married woman, sternly warning her to maintain proper boundaries before marriage so people wouldn't gossip. Flustered and blushing, Lin Yuezhi headed to work. She carried my basket of gifts and delivered it directly to Fu Jianye's car at the farm, blushing furiously when he teased her again as his sister-in-law. Around 5 in the evening, Lin Yuezhi woke me up. Still half asleep and disoriented, I accidentally called her wife. Her face turned bright red, and she playfully shoved me while calling me shameless. I teased her further by poking her ticklish spots, making her burst into laughter. In the other room, her mother listened closely, ready to step in at a moment's notice to enforce proper behavior. Lin Yuezhi told me that Fu Jianye was waiting outside to invite us both over for dinner, and she handed me my clean, dry socks so I could get dressed. Lin Yuezhi and I accompanied Fu Jianye to the Municipal Party Committee courtyard for dinner. Lin Yuezhi brought canned peaches and malted milk powder as gifts. Secretary Fu and his wife welcomed us warmly, immediately putting Lin Yuezhi at ease. We enjoyed a wonderful dinner over Mutai wine, with Mrs. Fu and Lin Yuezhi bonding like family. Afterward, Fu Jianye drove us back. I slept in Lin Yuezhi's room while she stayed with her mother. The next morning, after enjoying a simple breakfast, Lin Yuezhi and I visited our newly rented factory building. The warehouse was clean, and Fu Jianye had supplied sturdy wooden racks for storing clothes. We set up a stove in the top-floor office, then went to the department store to buy bedding, a radio, and household essentials. When we returned to set up the room, I teased Lin Yuezhi about taking a nap together on the soft mattress. She blushed furiously, warning me that her mother strictly forbade premarital intimacy to avoid any embarrassing gossip, though she shyly implied that everything would be fine once we were married. Later, as I gave Lin Yuezhi a ride back to Forest Farm on my bicycle, Zhang Fan and his sidekick Dong Hui spotted us together. Zhang Fan was furious that Lin Yuezhi had chosen me, but he was too terrified to pick a fight directly, knowing I had stabbed the notorious thug Lai the Toad. At noon, Lin's mother prepared a delicious feast of stewed hazel grouse and mountain frogs with potatoes. After lunch, Lin Yuezhi and I strolled over to the local dog market to look for a reliable guard dog for the factory warehouse. As we browsed through the stalls, Lin Yuezhi suddenly called out in excitement, pointing to an exceptionally chubby puppy that caught both of our eyes. At the dog market, I recognized a pair of 2-month-old Caucasian shepherds. The seller was eager to sell because the massive puppies ate too much for his family to afford. After some quick bargaining, Lin Yuezhi and I bought both puppies for 15 yuan. We carried them to my newly rented factory, leaving them in the care of Grandpa Zhang, our night watchman. We bought cornmeal at the supply and marketing cooperative, cooked up a batch of food, and watched the hungry puppies devour it. Lin Yuezhi named the male puppy Hazel Mushroom and the female Wood Ear. After spending the afternoon playing with the dogs, I rode my bicycle to take Lin Yuezhi home for dinner. As I walked back alone through the dark alley, my sharp senses picked up footsteps behind me. I glanced back and spotted Zhang Fan and Dong Hui sneaking up with a burlap sack and a pickaxe handle, attempting to ambush me. I sidestepped as Dong Hui tried to throw the sack over my head, causing him to fall flat on his face. Zhang Fan swung his wooden stick, accidentally striking Dong Hui in the back instead. Before Zhang Fan could recover, I delivered a swift kick that sent him flying into a snowdrift. I grabbed the drop pickaxe handle and struck Dong Hui's backside, prompting him to cry out for help. Hearing his shouts, a group of Zhang Fan's friends rushed into the narrow alley carrying weapons. Unfazed, I pulled my military knife from my belt, the sharp blade glinting under the moonlight. Seeing the knife and remembering my reputation for stabbing Lai the Toad, the dozen young men froze in fear and nervously backed away. I grabbed Zhang Fan, dragged him from the snow, and tossed him toward his hesitant friends. Stepping firmly on his chest, I exposed his sleazy actions right in front of his group, revealing how he had tried to force Lin Yuezhi into dating him by leveraging her mother's emergency surgery money. Disgusted by the truth, his friends refused to help him up. I leaned down, tapped the flat edge of my knife against Zhang Fan's cheek, and warned him that out of respect for his parents, past help to Lin's family, I would spare him this once, but if he ever tried to cause trouble again, I would cripple him. After confronting Zhang Fan, I walked past the quieted crowd. Shaken and disgraced, Zhang Fan was pulled to his feet by Li Xiaodong, who told him to stop troubling Lin Yuezhi because he wasn't good enough for her. When Zhang Fan threw a tantrum, Li Xiaodong called him out for using money to threaten a girl, declaring that their friendship was over. Zhang Fan then slapped his sidekick Dong Hui in frustration, leaving Dong Hui harboring a growing, gloomy resentment as Zhang Fan limped away alone. Meanwhile, Lin Yuezhi overheard the commotion from inside her yard, her heart set even more firmly on me. Back at the factory, I spent time playing with my puppies, Hazel Mushroom and Wood Ear, before heading upstairs. I lit the stove, tuned the radio to storytelling broadcasts, soaked my feet, and fell asleep peacefully. Early the next morning, someone knocked on the factory gate. It was Li Xiaodong from the alley fight, asking to speak with me. I went down, unlocked the small gate, and met him. He apologized for last night, explaining that he had cut ties with Zhang Fan after learning how he threatened Lin Yuezhi. Li Xiaodong explained that his mother was Aunt Zhang, a close friend of Lin Yuezhi's mother, and that she had spoken very highly of my capabilities. Hearing that he was Aunt Zhang's son, my opinion of him improved greatly. I invited him upstairs, poured him a glass of water, and listened as he respectfully called me brother-in-law. He shared that as the son of ordinary factory workers, he had been waiting 2 years for a job opening at Forest Farm and was considering joining the army, but now hoped to work for my new business instead. I offered Li Xiaodong a job at my business, promising 30 yuan a month to help around the factory and learn how to run a clothing wholesale operation. He accepted eagerly. When he asked if my fight with Lai the Toad was connected to the clothing trade, I smiled and confirmed that taking down the local thug helped clear the path for my business. Li Xiaodong hurried home to pack his bags, leaving his mother, Aunt Zhang, completely bewildered. He explained that he was moving to the factory to work for his brother-in-law and had cut ties with Zhang Fan after learning how Zhang Fan had threatened Lin Yuezhi. Aunt Zhang felt relieved that her son was finally leaving Zhang Fan's toxic influence behind, encouraging him to work hard and act sensibly. On his way back to the factory with his luggage, Li Xiaodong ran into Lin Yuezhi, who was carrying a lunchbox. When he excitedly referred to me as his brother-in-law, Lin Yuezhi blushed without denying it and helped him carry his bags on her bicycle. When they arrived, our puppies, Hazel Mushroom and Wood Ear, happily greeted Lin Yuezhi. She brought the lunchbox upstairs to my room, gently scolding me for smoking so much the night before. She handed me a fresh batch of pickled cabbage and pork dumplings she had made, then began tidying up my bed and sheets. As I wolfed down the delicious dumplings, Lin Yuezhi sat beside me with a sweet smile, softly telling me to slow down. When Lin Yuezhi asked why I brought Li Xiaodong on board, I explained that his persistence and respect won me over, and I knew he would be a trustworthy worker. After buying and installing a stove for him, we spent the morning playing with our puppies. Lin Yuezhi went home after lunch to care for her recovering mother. By December 22nd, Li Xiaodong and I had cleaned the entire factory. Around 8 in the morning, Zhou Bin arrived with a tricycle team to deliver our shipment. Zhou Bin and his crew went above and beyond, neatly arranging all the goods onto the warehouse shelves. I gave Zhou Bin a 10 yuan tip for his men, and he assured me he would always be ready for future deliveries. Lai Xingfu arrived alongside Zhou Bin. I had Xiaodong bring him upstairs to my office. To my surprise, Lai Xingfu had brought me a high-end Chinese character display pager worth over 2,000 yuan, complete with an activated number. I thanked him warmly for the practical gift. He then handed me the official contract for our clothing wholesale agreement. After reviewing the terms, including the trademark clauses, I signed the document. I mentioned that I would need another batch of goods worth about 100,000 yuan right after the new year, which pleased him greatly. At noon, I took Lai Xingfu out for lunch. Instead of a basic state-run eatery, I led him behind the government building to a prestigious 4-story restaurant displaying 4 red banners. In local tradition, 4 banners signified a top-tier establishment capable of cooking any requested dish. An elegant greeter bowed to welcome us and escorted us to a private upstairs room, leaving Lai Xingfu thoroughly impressed with the fine service. I hosted Lai Xingfu at a luxurious restaurant, joined by Lin Yuezhi and Li Xiaodong. Lai Xingfu enthusiastically ordered rare delicacies like orchid bear paw and flying dragon white mushroom soup, while I added 4 more dishes to round out our 200 yuan feast. I formally introduced Lin Yuezhi as my girlfriend and Li Xiaodong as my brother-in-law. Lai Xingfu was thoroughly impressed by Lin Yuezhi's striking beauty and praised my good fortune. We all enjoyed a fantastic meal together, with Lai Xingfu savoring the rich, authentic flavors of the rare dishes. After our meal, Lin Yuezhi went to work, and I accompanied Lai Xingfu back to the guest house before heading home to rest. Since the shipment of clothes had arrived and met high-quality standards, I planned to begin selling them the next day after seeing Lai Xingfu off. Around 4 in the afternoon, Lai Xingfu suddenly rushed into my factory in a complete panic. He breathlessly explained that his briefcase had been stolen at the department store while he was buying cigarettes. While he did not care about the cash inside, the bag contained his official contracts and essential personal identification documents, without which he could not return to Guangzhou. Since there were no surveillance cameras in those days, retrieving stolen property was nearly impossible for ordinary people. However, I knew that local thieves belonged to organized networks with distinct territories. The pickpockets operating around the department store were under the control of a ruthless thief king, nicknamed Governor General. Losing a guest's bag on my home turf was a hit to my reputation, so I resolved to step in and retrieve Lai Xingfu's briefcase. After confirming that Lai Xingfu had lost his briefcase at the department store, I tucked my military dagger into my waistband and prepared to track it down. Li Xiaodong offered to accompany me, or gather help from Forest Farm, but I told him to stay at the factory and take care of Lai Xingfu. I walked 20 minutes to the suburban courtyard of the Governor General, the notorious king of local thieves. A young man led me inside to a cramped room where the Governor General was smoking on a heated brick bed, surrounded by several followers. The stolen briefcase sat on the bed alongside a stack of cash. I politely offered 500 yuan to buy back my friend's briefcase, but the Governor General brought up an old grudge, accusing me of crippling his godson, Monkey. When I defended my actions, the Governor General grew arrogant, demanding that I leave the cash, host a banquet at Bafangzhai restaurant, kowtow to him, and acknowledge him as my godfather to settle the score. Refusing to tolerate his arrogance, I drew my dagger and charged. In the tight space, I swiftly disarmed his followers. Within 2 minutes, every thug in the room was on the floor, clutching a slashed wrist. The Governor General glared at me, declaring that I had made an enemy of him. I remained completely unfazed, warning him that if we were truly enemies, I would systematically cripple his followers whenever I saw them in public. I cold-bloodedly asked if he was afraid of dying, pointing out that if I dumped him into a frozen ice hole, none of his crew would ever dare report it to the police. Facing my unyielding threat, the Governor General finally dropped his arrogant stance. I explained that crippling his godson Monkey was necessary self-defense because the kid came for my life. Though I knew the Governor General was furious over my slashing his men's wrists, I offered a practical resolution. I kept the briefcase, paid him 100 yuan for each injured boy's medical expenses, and promised to give them honest jobs at my factory once they recovered. Recognizing that thievery was no long-term future for his orphaned followers, the Governor General reluctantly accepted my terms. He handed over the briefcase, accepted the money, and warned that if I failed to deliver on my promise after the new year, he would seek revenge. After I left, his followers protested, but he sternly reminded them that severed hand tendons meant their stealing days were over, and that in this world, nothing is more important than surviving and living well. I returned to the factory at 5:30 and handed the briefcase back to Lai Xingfu. He was deeply moved that I had braved the dangerous thief king's hideout alone on his behalf. Upon checking his bag, he was astonished to find all his documents, contracts, and cash intact, with an extra 37 yuan inside. That evening, we celebrated over a meal of braised monkey head mushrooms with pheasant at Bafangzhai restaurant. After seeing Lai Xingfu off with Li Xiaodong, I prepared for my big launch the next day, setting up my clothing stall right in front of the Forest Farm courtyard. However, as I stepped into the dark alley leading back to the factory, I suddenly froze, reached toward my lower back, and sensed danger waiting in the shadows. After sensing a presence in the alley, I called out to the Governor General, who jumped down from a 2-meter wall. He admitted he had planned to ambush me with a club, but my sharp senses ruined his plan. Recognizing that I was a formidable opponent, he warned me to stay alert because others in the city were plotting against me, though he promised his own crew would not get involved. I thanked him for the warning, and he backed into the shadows. The next morning, I bought a new bicycle for 220 yuan. Around 10 o'clock, Li Xiaodong and I set up our street stall in the open area in front of the Forest Farm entrance. I gave the gatekeeper 2 packs of cigarettes and hung up sample items on a display rope, including bell-bottom jeans, polyester shirts, and chiffon dresses. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Forest Farm employees flooded out after work. I loudly called out to the crowd, advertising high-quality Southern clothing at clearance prices. Because my prices were 5 yuan cheaper than state department stores and local dealers, customers quickly gathered round. I used persuasive sales pitches, convincing one hesitant young woman to buy a chiffon dress by appealing to her independence and self-worth. While Li Xiaodong awkwardly learned how to negotiate with customers, Lin Yuezhi arrived on her bicycle. Seeing me chatting warmly with female buyers, she teased me with a hint of jealousy. When a female colleague recognized Lin Yuezhi and asked for a discount, Lin Yuezhi proudly introduced me as her boyfriend. To give her face, I immediately offered the colleague the pair of pants at my cost price of 20 yuan. After my friend bought the pants and left, Lin Yuezhi gently pinched my waist, scolding me for giving such a steep discount to a mere coworker. I smiled, reassuring her, and urged her to go home out of the cold. Around noon, after selling over 20 pairs of pants, 2 skirts, and 4 shirts to the wealthy forest farm workers, Lin Yuezhi brought us lunch boxes filled with rice, stewed cabbage, tofu, and pork belly. After finishing our meal, Li Xiaodong and I packed up our stall and relocated to the busy street in front of the Railway Cultural Palace, near the state-owned department store. Meanwhile, news reached Lai the Toad, who was recovering in bed from his knife wounds. Upon learning that I was selling bell-bottom jeans for 30 yuan, 4 yuan cheaper than his price, he flew into a rage. Fearing his business would be ruined, he ordered his henchmen, led by a long-haired thug named Xiao Ke, to gather over 50 men, smash my stall, and break both my legs. At the Cultural Palace, Li Xiaodong was thrilled by our fast sales, having made hundreds of yuan in just one afternoon. I strung a display rope between 2 poplar trees and began selling. Passers-by quickly gathered, eager to buy high-quality Southern clothing at my discounted prices. Just as business was booming, the crowd suddenly scattered as over 50 thugs marched toward us, carrying pickaxe handles and steel pipes. I recognized the long-haired leader, Xiao Ke, a notorious future enforcer. Seeing the massive crowd of armed men, 19-year-old Li Xiaodong trembled with fear. Yet he bravely told me to run while he held them off. I patted his shoulder, told him to step aside, and remained calm. I knew I couldn't defeat 50 men in a physical brawl, but I already had a clever plan to defuse the situation without relying on brute force. A crowd gathered outside the Cultural Palace as Xiao Ke and his 50 armed men approached. While Li Xiaodong watched nervously, Fatty Zhou Bin unexpectedly stepped in, wielding a 1.2-meter axe to back me up. Seeing this, local powerhouse Monk, the martial arts-trained son of the Railway Bureau chief, and his cunning partner Shusai took notice from the sidelines. When Xiao Ke tried to intimidate me with his numbers, Zhou Bin publicly mocked him, threatening to call his own reinforcements. I warmly thanked Zhou Bin for having my back, then respectfully turned to Monk, apologizing for causing a scene on his turf. Giving Monk proper respect instantly earned his favor. Monk stepped forward with 50 of his own men, directly confronting Xiao Ke for causing trouble on his territory and putting the thugs on the defensive. Instead of hiding behind Monk or relying on brute force, I took control of the situation to settle things cleanly. I politely asked Monk to act as the official witness for a traditional circle draw, a strict, bare-knuckle, one-on-one duel inside a human ring where no outside interference or weapons are allowed. Impressed by my respect and clever tactics, Monk's eyes lit up as he agreed to oversee the fight. Xiao Ke accepted the one-on-one duel, confident in his own fighting ability. Monk clearly stated the rules. No weapons were allowed inside the human circle, and no outside interference would be tolerated until one side surrendered. I handed my military knife to Li Xiaodong, removed my heavy coat, and stepped into the ring. Xiao Ke took off his coat as well and charged at me with a fast punch. I sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, raised his arm, and slammed him hard onto the ground. Before he could recover, I straddled him and unleashed a flurry of heavy punches to his face, instantly knocking him out cold. The entire crowd, including Monk and Lai the Toad's henchmen, stood frozen in shock. Xiao Ke was a well-known local fighter, yet I had finished him off in seconds. Scared and humiliated, Lai the Toad's men quickly carried the unconscious Xiao Ke away. Monk warned them to tell Lai the Toad never to cause trouble on his turf again. Impressed by my hunting-trained martial arts skills, Monk offered me a cigarette, offered to cover for me around the cultural palace, and warned me to stay cautious of Lie the Toad's vengeful nature. I politely declined his offer to escort me home, making it clear that I was focused on business rather than gang life. But I invited Monk and Fatty Jobin to join me for drinks that evening. Business surged for the rest of the afternoon. Impressed by my handsome looks and combat skills, many young women flocked to my stall, allowing us to generate over 2,000 yuan in total sales for the day. By 4:30, Li Xiaodong went inside to call Monk, while Jobin arrived on his tricycle against the setting sun to join us for our evening gathering. After our successful afternoon at the Cultural Palace, Monk took us to a small restaurant behind the building. We gathered in a private room around a heated brick bed table. Our group of 6 included me, Fatty Jobin, Li Xiaodong, Monk, his friend Shucai, and a quiet guy named Taejun. We ordered 8 dishes and 6 bottles of erguatu. As the drinks flowed, Monk and Shucai praised my combat skills, marveling at how easily I had knocked out Xiao Ke. Monk boasted about his local influence and claimed fame and women were all that mattered. I simply smiled and agreed without arguing. I knew that spoiled rich kids like Monk and Shucai had no concept of real life, whereas true long-term success depended on building financial security. While Monk, Shucai, and Li Xiaodong got drunk engaged in loud drinking contests with Jobin, Taejun quietly approached me. Coming from a poor background unlike his wealthy friends, Taejun was desperate to make real money. He lit my cigarette and sincerely asked if he could join my clothing business. Seeing his ambition, I offered him 2 options. The first was buying inventory directly from me at wholesale prices, 8 yuan for jeans, 6 yuan for standard shirts, and 10 yuan for chiffon skirts, which would yield massive profit margins when resold at retail. The second option was acting as a middleman. Since I held the lowest supply prices from the south, he wouldn't need capital. He just needed to convince local clothing vendors and store owners across our region to source their goods through me. Instead of traveling all the way south, he could keep all the profits above my baseline wholesale cost. Realizing that our province had 8 cities and an autonomous prefecture full of clothing sellers who would far prefer a local supplier, Taejun's eyes lit up with excitement. He instantly recognized this as his ultimate chance to change his life and confidently declared that he could do it. After finishing our meal around 8 o'clock, Monk and Shucai were completely passed out drunk, so I paid the bill and left them to sleep at the restaurant. Taejun offered to walk me back, but I told him to stay and look after them. Knowing that Lie the Toad's thugs would likely target me on my way home, I asked Jobin to take my drunk brother-in-law, Li Xiaodong, to stay at his place. Jobin offered me his heavy axe for self-defense, but I declined, relying solely on my trusted military dagger. I set off alone into the freezing, snowy night toward the agricultural machinery factory. As I walked through the quiet old city district, a scout spotted me and sprinted away to alert the others. Soon, the chaotic sound of dozens of rushing footsteps echoed through the dark streets. Fueled by alcohol and adrenaline, I charged straight into the incoming mob of over 70 thugs. A fierce, bloody brawl erupted under the dark sky. Although the thugs pelted me with wooden sticks, the numbness in my back only fueled my fighting spirit. I swung my dagger relentlessly, slashing through their ranks and carving out a path. Terrified by my fearless, unrelenting assault, the thugs began to panic as their wounded companions writhed on the blood-stained snow. A wide gap formed around me. Seeing the bruised Xiao Ke hiding behind his men, I wiped the blood from my face and laughed hysterically. Desperate, Xiao Ke screamed at his men to charge, but nobody dared step forward. Holding my bloodied knife, I stared down the trembling crowd and declared that anyone trying to ruin my livelihood was risking their life. I warned them that if anyone died by my blade tonight, they should tell King Yama that Ningji sent them. I charged forward again, completely shattering their morale. The crowd scattered in a frantic panic, trampling Xiao Ke in the chaos. I ordered the remaining, terrified thugs to pick up their dozen or so injured companions and get them to the hospital immediately, bringing the bloody ambush to a sudden end. I dragged Xiao Ke into a snowdrift, grabbed his hair and punched him repeatedly until he passed out cold. Terrified, Lai the Toad's remaining henchmen scrambled to help their wounded and fled to the hospital. After they left, I sat on the snowy ground to catch my breath, feeling a sticky, sharp pain across my back. Moments later, Fatty Joe Bin arrived on his tricycle, sweating profusely. Surprised to see me alive after facing over 70 thugs, he examined my back under a flashlight. Fortunately, my second uncle had made me a special medicine-soaked leather vest to protect against deer antlers while hunting. The attacker's axe had cleaved through my thick vest, leaving only a minor 4-centimeter surface scratch. Jobin assured me a little disinfectant and rest would fix it right up. We tossed the unconscious Xiao Ke onto the back of the tricycle. I told Jobin to ride straight to Lai the Toad's house so I could drop off his enforcer and settle our conflict once and for all. As Jobin pedaled through the cold night, I asked if he wanted to change his life. I advised him to save up his earnings from hauling my future shipments so he could rent a sand quarry near Shaoqing River in the spring. When Jobin looked confused, I quietly revealed that our city was planning an upcoming old city renovation project, which would create a massive demand for fine construction sand. Realizing I had connections to high-level officials, Jobin swallowed hard and promised to keep his mouth shut and stay sober. He knew that by sharing this secret, I was giving him a genuine chance to rewrite his destiny. When we arrived at Lai Hama's house, I pulled Xiao Ke off the tricycle. Terrified of me, he limped to the front gate and pleaded with me not to involve his boss's family. I scoffed, well aware that Lai Hama's parents lived elsewhere, and his wife was working the night shift at the hospital. Xiao Ke reluctantly knocked on the gate. When a henchman opened it, I shoved my way inside. Terrified by my presence, the henchman scrambled indoors, bolted the door, and screamed to Lai Hama that I had arrived. Panicked henchmen frantically grabbed kitchen knives and stools to defend the room. Realizing his 70 or 80 men couldn't stop me earlier, Lai Hama was consumed by fear and regret over provoking such a ruthless fighter. Resolving to face whatever came, he ordered his men to open the door. I walked calmly into the room, without paying attention to the armed henchmen. Xiao Ke followed silently behind me, clutching a kitchen knife. Sitting on the heated brick bed, Lai Hama declared that I could do whatever I wanted with him, vowing not to flinch. Respecting his defiance, I lit 2 cigarettes and handed one to him. Lai Hama accepted the cigarette suspiciously and bitterly asked if I came to humiliate him, bringing up how I had stabbed his legs and injured his men. I looked him in the eye and asked what actual grudge existed between us. I pointed out that his underlings had targeted me first, while I was peacefully staying at a hotel, forcing me to defend my own hard-earned money. Stunned by my logic, Lai Hama fell silent, realizing that he had indeed started the fight and taken those 2 knife wounds for nothing. He asked if I was here to make peace. I shook my head and told him gravely that I was actually there to discuss a business deal. Lai the Toad looked at me in disbelief when I told him I wanted to do business with him. After having Xiao Ke call Fatty Joe Bin into the room out of the freezing cold, I got straight to the point. Since we were both in the clothing trade, I offered to supply him with southern clothing of equal quality at 8 yuan per piece, complete with hassle-free returns and exchanges. Lai the Toad was skeptical, so I introduced my second option. I offered to supply him with jeans at a discounted wholesale price of 6 yuan per piece for orders of at least 500 pairs. Alternatively, if he introduced other clothing vendors to buy from me at 8 yuan per piece, I would kick back a 2 yuan commission to him for every single item sold. He stared at me in shock as the realization set in. Whether he bought for his own store or acted as a middleman, he stood to make huge profits while eliminating the travel costs, theft risks, and hassles of sourcing directly from the South. Furthermore, with dozens of clothing stores and street vendors in City B alone, not to mention nearby counties and neighboring provinces, the business potential was massive. Driven by profit, Lai the Toad quickly agreed, confirming that our past feud was officially over. I reminded him that his large network of followers gave him a huge advantage in expanding the business. Satisfied that the conflict was resolved and a new partnership was born, Joe Bin and I took our leave into the night. After leaving Lai Hama's house, Joe Bin offered to join my new commission arrangement. He pedaled his tricycle to drop me off at the factory, noting that my fierce victory over 70 thugs tonight would solidify my fearsome reputation across the city. Back at the factory, I greeted my growing guard puppies, spoke with Grandpa Zhang, applied medicine to my back injury, and fell into a deep sleep. I woke up at 7:30 the next morning to find Lin Yuezhi sitting at the edge of my bed, pouting anxiously. Having heard about the previous night's massive street fight, she was deeply upset and worried. When I winced while reaching for her, she panicked and checked my injury. Seeing the long gash across my back, she carefully applied fresh medicine for me. She explained that she had taken the day off from work just to check on me, venting her frustration at Lai Hama for constantly causing us trouble. When I casually mentioned that the entire situation with Lai Hama had been taken care of, Lin Yuezhi misinterpreted my words and thought I had killed him. Overcome with panic, she began frantically searching through my drawers, crying uncontrollably and urging me to flee south immediately to hide from the law while promising to wait for me. Touched by her intense devotion, I hugged her tightly from behind, wiped away her tears, and reassured her that I hadn't killed anyone and that Lai Hama and I had officially made peace. Relieved and flustered, Lin Yuezhi looked up at me with teary eyes. As I held her close and leaned down for a kiss, Li Xiaodong suddenly burst into the room. Caught completely off guard, he awkwardly apologized and scrambled back outside. Lin Yuezhi playfully punched my chest in embarrassment, scolding me for acting shameless in broad daylight. Smiling, I pulled her back in, held her tight, and kissed her deeply, leaving her breathless and blushing as red as the sunset. Lin Yuezhi took the day off to stay with me after hearing rumors about the massive brawl. I reassured her about my deal with Lai the Toad, explaining that giving him a wholesale markup was far better than trying to pitch every local shopkeeper myself. Meanwhile, local rumors about my fight escalated, turning my victory over 80 men into legend. Instead of holding a grudge, Lai the Toad declared us brothers and dispatched dozens of his men to promote my wholesale clothing. Tijun also boarded a train to Ping City to expand our network. At our stall, a local clothing seller named Li Dong approached me after hearing from Lai the Toad. He inspected my jeans, Decron shirts, and chiffon dresses, thoroughly impressed by the high quality. Trying to bypass Lai the Toad, Li Dong offered to buy directly from me for a personal discount. I firmly refused, stressing that integrity comes first and I would never cut out my business partner behind his back. Impressed by my principles, Li Dong placed a sizable order: 500 pairs of jeans, 100 Decron shirts, 100 chiffon blouses, and 10 skirts. I sent Li Xiaodong to guide him to our factory warehouse to fulfill the order and complete the paperwork. Shortly after, Monk and Shusai dropped by. Monk marveled at how I faced a massive crowd unharmed, admitting the streets were filled with wild rumors about my martial arts skills. I explained that taking a decisive stand early on was necessary to deter future troublemakers as my business grew. As Monk watched Lin Yuezhi handle our bustling crowd of customers, many of whom came out of curiosity to see the legendary fighter, he praised her striking beauty and told me how lucky I was, before his expression suddenly darkened. 2 officers from the Industry and Commerce Bureau approached my stall to inspect my business license. When the senior officer pointed out that operating a street stall outside my registered factory location was illegal, I calmly dropped names, mentioning my strong connection to Fu Jianye and Secretary Fu from the Municipal Party Committee courtyard. Realizing I had high-level backing, the officer softened his tone, issued a harmless verbal warning, and rode away without fining me. Lin Yuezhi worriedly began packing up our goods, but I told her to keep selling. While Monk laughed and assured her the warning was just for show. After reassuring Lin Yuezhi, I asked Monk and Shilsai to watch my stall for a moment, while I slipped away to investigate who had reported us. In a nearby alley, Zhang Fan and his sidekick Dong Hui were hiding, furious that the officers hadn't shut down my business. Zhang Fan threw a tantrum, cursing both me and Lin Yuezhi. When Dong Hui echoed his insult against Lin Yuezhi, the unstable Zhang Fan slapped him across the face. Dong Hui swallowed his humiliation, maintaining his fake loyalty only because he needed Zhang Fan's father to secure him an official job quota at the forest farm. To get on Zhang Fan's good side, Donghui suggested setting a fire to destroy all the clothing stock stored at my factory warehouse. Timid yet cruel, Zhang Fan eagerly took the hint, subtly pressuring Donghui to commit the arson in exchange for the promised forest farm job. After Donghui suggested burning down my warehouse, Zhang Fan threatened him, pressuring him to do the arson in exchange for a forest farm job quota. As Donghui reluctantly agreed, I suddenly appeared at the alley entrance. When Zhang Fan and Donghui tried to run, Donghui abandoned Zhang Fan and fled. I grabbed Zhang Fan by the neck and pummeled him as he curled up, crying and begging for mercy. Watching from a distance, Donghui felt a surge of satisfaction seeing Zhang Fan get beaten. However, fearing Zhang Fan's petty retaliation if he didn't intervene, Donghui grabbed a thick wooden log and rushed back into the alley, shouting at me to let Zhang Fan go. I easily dodged his clumsy swing, tripped him into the snow, and kicked him hard in the back before swaggering away. After I left, Zhang Fan kicked Donghui out of frustration, but Donghui hid his hatred and offered him a cigarette, falsely reassuring him that he had only left to find a weapon. Donghui promised to burn down my warehouse that very night, making Zhang Fan believe Lin Yuezhi would return to him once I went broke. Zhang Fan accepted the plan, hiding the fact that his father had actually sold the promised forest farm job quota to someone else for a television. I returned to my street stall, where Monk and Shieldsai were helping sell clothes. Thanks to their popularity, sales soared, making over 3,000 yuan by 5 in the afternoon. Lin Yuezhi handed me the money pouch, flustered by my teasing and flirtatious looks. After packing up and walking Lin Yuezhi home, I invited Monk and Shieldsai back to yesterday's restaurant for a feast to thank them. When I entered the private room, Li Xiaodong looked at my face in confusion and naively asked who had beaten me up to make my lips so swollen. At the restaurant, Monk, Xiaocai, and Li Xiaodong teased me about my swollen lips. Soon, Zhou Bin arrived and joined our lively drinking contest. Our business was expanding rapidly, with multiple local clothing store owners, sent by both Taijun and Lai the Toad, coming to buy inventory from us. Meanwhile, under the pitch-black night sky, Donghui sneaked over to my factory warehouse with a bottle of kerosene tucked into his coat. Desperate to secure a permanent forest farm job through Zhang Fan, he tried climbing the concrete pile by the 5-meter wall to commit arson. Just as he attempted to scale it, a foot pinned him down with crushing force. It was the Governor General, the local thief king. Smelling the strong scent of kerosene, the Governor General dragged the terrified Donghui away before Grandpa Zhang could open the factory door. By the light of his diesel lighter, the Governor General interrogated Donghui. Donghui broke down, confessing that Zhang Fan had forced him into doing it. Disgusted by the cowardly act, the Governor General kicked Donghui to the ground, scolding him that even women wouldn't burn down someone's property. He threatened to cripple Donghui if he ever tried such dirty tricks again, prompting the terrified young man to flee into the night. Around 8 o'clock, Li Xiaodong and I walked back to the factory after drinking heavily. Sensing a presence in the dark alley, I called out to the shadow on the wall. The Governor General leaped down and casually warned me that Donghui had tried to burn down my warehouse with kerosene. I clasped my hands in sincere gratitude, but the Governor General grumbled that he only intervened so he wouldn't be framed for the fire. After the Governor General left, Li Xiaodong exploded in anger, cursing Donghui for blindly doing Zhang Fan's dirty work. He revealed that Zhang Fan's father had already traded the forest farm job quota to another family in exchange for a television, making Donghui a complete fool for risking everything for a lie. Connecting the arson attempt with my memories from my past life, I realized that Zhang Fan and his entire family had been killed in a house fire originally blamed on Lin Yuezhi. It suddenly became clear to me that Donghui was likely the true arsonist behind that tragic event. When Li Xiaodong angrily vowed to get revenge on Donghui for trying to burn down my factory, I told him to stay calm and think things through. While peeing against the wall together, I asked Li Xiaodong if his cousin Li Jian could keep quiet about buying the forest farm job quota from Zhang Fan's father. Li Xiaodong assured me the secret was safe. I then subtly asked what Donghui would do if he discovered that Zhang Fan had played him for a fool and given his job quota away. Li Xiaodong shuddered at the thought, knowing Dong Hui would want to kill Zhang Fan. I left the decision in Li Xiaodong's hands, explaining that pitting two enemies against each other to devour one another was the smartest, most effortless way to handle them. Li Xiaodong spent the night tossing and turning, torn between childhood friendships and loyalty to me. The next morning, as he stepped outside to buy breakfast, he caught Dong Hui lurking near the alley entrance. Dong Hui nervously probed to see if the failed arson attempt had been discovered, making fake small talk about inviting Li Xiaodong over for dinner. Disgusted by Dong Hui's hypocrisy, Li Xiaodong made his choice. He casually asked Dong Hui about his forest farm job status, mentioning that his cousin Li Jian had just secured the official entry quota. Dong Hui froze in shock, realizing Zhang Fan had lied to him all along. Devastated and stumbling home in disbelief, Dong Hui was suddenly met by his younger brother running down the street, crying out that their father was gone. Dong Hui stood frozen as his younger brother frantically broke the devastating news. Their father had tragically died after being buried under a fallen timber load while working at the logging site. Overcome with shock, Dong Hui tried to deny the reality, rambling about buying sorghum liquor and chicken for his father's return. But as his brother screamed in grief, Dong Hui broke down into loud, desperate wailing on the snowy street. Returning home, Dong Hui knelt before his father's coffin in total despair. With his father gone, his mother collapsed in tears, leaving Dong Hui as the sole breadwinner for his destitute family and younger siblings. Meanwhile, back at the factory, Li Xiaodong and I were preparing for the day's sales when Lai the Toad's henchman arrived with 3 wholesale clients. I welcomed them upstairs, served them hot tea, and discussed business. I assured them that my clothing prices would remain consistently low, matching Southern wholesale rates, and guaranteed reliable supply and quality. I also teased that new stock, including popular university graduation jackets, would arrive soon. Reassured, the 3 buyers placed a combined order of 1,200 items. Lai the Toad's henchman was thrilled, earning a 600 yuan commission from the sale. As I handed over his cut, I cautioned him not to hand over all his client contacts directly to the buyers, warning him not to let them discard him once he served his purpose. Later that morning, Li Xiaodong and I set up our stall by the Cultural Palace, where a steady stream of holiday shoppers quickly bought up our inventory. Back at the funeral, as Zhang Fan arrived to pay brief respects, Dong Hui pulled him aside. Looking at him with pale, desperate eyes, Dong Hui begged to know if his promised forest farm job quota was still guaranteed. At the funeral, Zhang Fan nervously lied to Dong Hui, falsely assuring him that his forest farm job quota was still guaranteed. As Zhang Fan hurried away, Dong Hui watched his departing figure with a chilling, murderous glare, realizing he was being played. 3 days passed in a flash, bringing me incredible business success. After having a landline phone installed at the factory, I called Lai Xingfu to order 100,000 yuan worth of fresh inventory. Retail and wholesale sales exploded, nearly clearing out our entire warehouse. I even hired the Governor General's injured followers to assist at our sales locations, giving them legitimate work while deterring potential thieves. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, Lin Yuezhi arrived at my Cultural Palace stall on her bicycle, having taken leave from work to help me manage the crowd. Impressed by her sharp accounting skills, I suggested she quit her forest farm job to manage inventory and finances for our expanding business full-time. She agreed to the idea, provided I get her mother's approval first. By 4 in the afternoon, we closed the stall and returned to my factory office. Lin Yuezhi sat at my desk calculating our earnings on an abacus. In just a few days, we had brought in 98,532 yuan, with over 40,000 yuan coming from direct retail sales alone. I shared my future vision of expanding our operation across the entire region and opening a permanent counter at the department store next year. After sharing an affectionate moment together in my room, Lin Yuezhi and I walked downstairs hand in hand, planning to visit her mother to discuss our marriage and her job transition. On our way out, we ran into Li Xiaodong returning from his sales location. He handed over the day's cash earnings and sales records before heading out toward Dong Hui's house. Meanwhile, deep inside the forest farm residential area, A dark figure clutching a sharp butcher's knife vanished silently into the shadows of the alley. Lin Yueji and I arrived at her family home in the Forest Farm residential area. Her mother's health had improved significantly, and she greeted me warmly. While Lin Yueji prepared dinner, I sat down with her mother to formally discuss our future. I shared that my business was thriving, with another 100,000 yuan worth of southern inventory arriving soon. I proposed bringing my family from the countryside after the new year to finalize our marriage, and her mother happily agreed. I then brought up having Lin Yueji quit her forest farm job to handle our company's accounting and finances full-time. I explained that with hundreds of thousands in monthly turnover, I needed a trusted partner to safeguard our money. Addressing her mother's concerns, I noted that Fu Jianye could easily help her return to work if necessary. Her mother acknowledged our plans and gave us her full blessing. After a delicious dinner of stewed pork and sauerkraut, Lin Yueji insisted I spend the night in her room while she slept with her mother. She washed my socks and prepared warm water for me before tucking me in. Lying in her cozy bed, I felt a deep sense of peace, recalling her steadfast devotion from our past life. Meanwhile, in her mother's room, Lin's mother quietly advised Lin Yueji to keep tight control over my finances to protect herself as my wealth grew. Lin Yueji firmly rejected the idea, explaining that we were building a life together, not fighting over an inheritance. She reminded her mother how I had stepped up to help their family in their darkest hour without asking for anything in return, unlike Zhang Fan's opportunistic family. Just as Lin's mother was about to respond, a loud, panicked knocking shattered the night, with someone frantically screaming outside that a fire had broken out. Smelling thick smoke outside Lin Yueji's house, I stepped into the yard and saw a red glow filling the dark night sky. Director Zhang's house was engulfed in flames, and the strong wind was spreading sparks onto neighboring woodpiles. I told Lin Yueji to pack her valuables and go stay safely at my factory. Though she worriedly begged me not to endanger myself, I grabbed a water bucket and joined the crowd of neighbors rushing to extinguish the blaze. We formed a bucket brigade, hurling water at the roaring inferno. Director Zhang's house was completely destroyed, trapping his entire family inside. While helping put out the fire, I passed Donghui carrying water buckets. In his eyes, I caught a terrifying mix of relief and madness. It hit me that just like in my past life, Donghui was the true arsonist behind the fire that destroyed Zhang Fan's family after losing his father and discovering Zhang Fan's deception. I chose not to intervene, knowing their deadly feud was between them alone. Once the authorities arrived and brought the fire under control, I returned to Lin Yueji's house, packed up, and rode my bicycle back to the factory. Grandpa Zhang opened the iron gate, where Lin Yueji ran to meet me, her face pale with relief upon seeing me safe and uninjured. Grandpa Zhang chuckled, teasing that she had been pacing back and forth waiting for my return. He mentioned that Li Xiaodong had also gone to help put out the fire and hadn't returned yet. After reassuring Lin Yueji's mother upstairs, I washed up and settled into Li Xiaodong's room to sleep. Meanwhile, near the burning residential area, Li Xiaodong emerged from the dark shadows and confronted an expressionless Donghui, asking him point-blank if he had started the fire. Confronted in the alley, Donghui broke down and admitted to Li Xiaodong that he had started the fatal fire. Driven to desperation after his father's death, Donghui explained that he had served as Zhang Fan's lackey for 3 years, hoping to secure a job at the forest farm to rescue his mother and younger siblings from the dangerous mines. When Zhang Fan lied to him right beside his father's coffin, even after giving him kerosene earlier to burn my warehouse, Donghui snapped. Li Xiaodong felt a surge of guilt, wondering if his own words had triggered the tragedy. Seeing Donghui's heartbreak, Li Xiaodong promised to keep his secret, telling him to live a good life from now on. The next morning, Li Xiaodong returned to the factory pale and remorseful. Sensing his guilt, I reassured him that Zhang Fan's cruel deception made Donghui's retaliation inevitable once the official job list was released. I advised Li Xiaodong that before one can help others, one must first establish a firm foothold in life. Feeling relieved, Li Xiaodong prepared for the day ahead. Afterward, I rode with Lin Yueji to the forest farm, where Fu Jianye approved her official resignation. She felt a weight lifted off her shoulders and eagerly joined me at our sales location. Over the next 5 days, our warehouse inventory sold out almost completely. After paying Lai Xingwang for the stock, we had over 11,000 yuan in profit. I gave 500 yuan to Li Xiaodong, who had rapidly developed into a skilled, natural businessman. Just as we were finishing lunch, Taejun made a grand return after being away for over 10 days, bringing over 20 merchants from Lin City to buy our clothing. I welcomed them into our newly renovated third-floor conference room, promising to have Li Xiaodong arrange their lodging and treat them to local Korean specialties that evening. Because our inventory had completely sold out and demand from incoming merchants was skyrocketing, my cash flow was severely strained. To secure a massive supply of goods, I needed capital immediately. I decided to pursue a rare opportunity. Engineer Li Weiguo from the machine factory held official vouchers for 2,000 Westlake televisions to raise funds for a research project, but nobody had the money to buy them. I rode my bicycle to see Fu Jianye at the forest farm. When I explained that I wanted to buy Engineer Li's TV vouchers, Fu Jianye pointed out that even at a discounted rate, 2,000 TVs would cost 600,000 yuan. I asked him to help me secure a major credit union loan. When I initially requested 200,000 yuan, Fu Jianye nearly threw an ashtray at me in anger, scolding me for asking the impossible and offering bribes. I explained my long-term strategy. After the recent fatal forest farm fire, the government would inevitably push for the old city renovation project. If I wanted my future construction company to win big municipal contracts next year, I needed substantial capital now. I reminded him of the deep life and death bond between our fathers, which softened his stance. He agreed to help me negotiate with the credit union before introducing me to Engineer Li. Fu Jianye drove us straight to the credit union to meet Director Liu. When Director Liu asked how much capital we needed, Fu Jianye shocked us both by asking for 600,000 yuan outright. Director Liu nearly choked on his tea, insisting that such a massive loan was impossible. However, Fu Jianye pressed on, emphasizing that my late father had saved his father's life during the war, making us true brothers. He assured Director Liu that his father, Secretary Fu, would personally remember this favor. Hearing about my rising business reputation and seeing Secretary Fu's backing, Director Liu finally gave in, agreeing to approve the massive loan for our family. Director Liu agreed to the loan, but processing a massive sum of 600,000 yuan will take a week. That evening, I invited Fu Jianye to dinner, but he declined because his family was setting him up on a blind date. I joined my 20 visiting merchants from Lin City for a meal at a North Korean restaurant, leaving Li Xiaodong and Taejun to entertain them. Afterward, I returned to the factory where Lin Yuezhi was keeping accounts. Around 7 o'clock, Fatty Jobin and his crew arrived with a fresh shipment of 100,000 yuan worth of clothing. I paid Jobin an extra 200 yuan for his hard work. After taking inventory, it was nearly 10 o'clock at night. Since it was too late for Lin Yuezhi to return to her mother's house, she agreed to stay overnight at the factory. We washed our feet, locked the door, and got into bed. Though she was nervous, I held her gently and patted her back until she fell asleep peacefully. The next morning, Lin Yuezhi made hand-pulled noodles for breakfast before we met the visiting merchants to finalize their orders. Later that morning, Fu Jianye drove me to the office of Engineer Li Weiguo at the machine factory. Engineer Li was under intense pressure. The higher-ups ordered him to lead a scientific research project down south before the mid-lunar month, but instead of cash funding, they only gave him official allocation vouchers for 2,000 Westlake televisions. An engineer rather than a businessman, he was struggling to find anyone to buy the vouchers to raise his needed research capital. When I asked Engineer Li how much money he actually required for his project, he admitted he only needed 500,000 yuan. Seeing a massive profit opportunity, I immediately offered to take the entire batch of 2,000 televisions off his hands for 500,000 yuan. Surprised and conflicted by my sudden offer, Engineer Li froze as he considered the deal. Engineer Li was caught off guard by my direct attempt to buy his television vouchers. regretting that he had revealed his minimum research budget of 500,000 yuan so quickly. Noticing his hesitation and blushing embarrassment, I spoke candidly. I acknowledged that as a businessman I aimed for a good deal, but as a fellow countryman, I deeply respected his scientific research. I urged him to state a fair price he could genuinely accept. Engineer Li considered his options carefully, knowing he needed to secure his funding without scaring me away. After taking a long drag on his cigarette, he firmly set the price at 550,000 yuan. I immediately accepted and shook his hand, making him feel a huge sense of relief. We drew up a formal written agreement stipulating that I would deliver the cash in exchange for the television vouchers in 7 days. After Fu Jianye drove me back to the forest farm, I called Lai Xingfu to order 200,000 yuan worth of additional clothing inventory, with payment due in a week. With incoming buyers organized by Taejun, Lai the Toad, and Fatty Joe Bin, demand was booming, and 1/3 of our current inventory sold out in a single day. I paid for all customer delivery charges to the train station myself, earning high praise from the visiting merchants. That evening, I poured warm water for Lin Yueji to wash her feet before we settled into bed. Though she nervously reminded me we weren't married yet, I kissed her forehead gently, held her close, and reassured her that I would respect her boundaries. The next morning, after Lin Yueji made breakfast, Joe Bin arrived at the factory with 2 new clients. Joe Bin honestly admitted they had sought me out directly, and he was only providing transport, refusing to take unearned credit. Just as I was praising his integrity, a man covered in blood suddenly burst into our courtyard, screaming frantically for help. A bloody man suddenly burst into my factory courtyard, screaming for help. He scrambled behind us just as a mob of over 20 aggressive men swarmed through the iron gate. The crowd parted for their leader, a muscular, scarred mobster in a mink coat known as Three-Eyed Leopard. I realized the wounded man hiding behind me was Xiao Shandong, a porter who worked near the train station. Knowing my factory was nearby, Xiao Shandong had deliberately run to my grounds to drag us into his fight. Three-Eyed Leopard sneered, ordering Xiao Shandong to step out and mocking Fatty Joe Bin when he hesitated. When I stepped forward and calmly asked Three-Eyed Leopard to take his fight outside my business, he scoffed at my street moniker, Little Yama, and arrogantly demanded to know who I thought I was. Seeing his total lack of respect for my boundary, I warned him that he couldn't run things however he pleased. Instead of talking further, Three-Eyed Leopard waved his hand, ordering his entire gang to charge us. Chaos erupted in the courtyard. Jobin grabbed an axe, Tijun seized a weapon, and even Grandpa Zhang rushed out, splashing a kettle of boiling water to scald the attackers. My workers and the Governor General's men joined the fight, creating a chaotic deadlock. Grabbing a wooden plank, I struck down one of the thugs before drawing my military dagger and charging directly at Three-Eyed Leopard. He drew a machete to block my blade, but the sheer force of my blow numbed his wrist. I sidestepped his counterattack, kicked his leg, and delivered a precise toe kick to his right wrist. With a sickening snap, his wrist dislocated at a sharp angle, sending his machete clattering onto the ground. As Three-Eyed Leopard howled in pain, I kicked him to the snow, straddled his chest, and raised my military dagger, plunging it down directly toward his head. With my military dagger pressed against Three-Eyed Leopard's neck, the entire courtyard fell dead silent. He tried to glare at me, but after I delivered a sharp slap and pressed the blade slightly deeper into his skin, he froze in terror. Sensing genuine death in my eyes, Three-Eyed Leopard surrendered, screaming at the top of his lungs that he gave up. Satisfied, I drew my knife, stood up, and ordered him to take his men outside. As he limped off, he spat threats, but I scoffed and warned him that I would cripple him if he ever dared to cause trouble on my property again. Suddenly, a loud scream echoed behind me. I turned to see Lin Yueji standing terrified, aiming a broken gun at the crowd to protect me. I quickly rushed over, took the weapon from her hands, and gently reassured her that everything was fine. Flustered and blushing, she ran back inside the building. Fatty, Jobin laughed heartily, congratulating me on having such a fierce and devoted wife. Turning my attention back to the bloody Xiao Shandong, I sneered at his attempt to thank me. Knowing he had deliberately run into my factory to drag me into his personal feud with Three-Eyed Leopard, I refused to be played. Ignoring his desperate pleas, I grabbed his collar and dragged him out to the front gate to let him face Three-Eyed Leopard himself. Just as Three-Eyed Leopard prepared to take his revenge, Xiao Shendong's older brother Da Fei arrived with a group of men. Unlike his scheming younger brother, Da Fei was an honorable, respected man in City B. Seeing his injured brother, Da Fei confronted Three-Eyed Leopard. Three-Eyed Leopard explained that Xiao Shandong had cheated at his gambling den, ruined his business, and stabbed one of his men. Realizing his brother was completely in the wrong, Da Fei offered to cover all medical bills and host an apology banquet. However, as soon as Three-Eyed Leopard brought up his broken hand, his temper flared up all over again. Da Fei quickly realized that his younger brother Xiao Shandong was at fault for using me to avoid Three-Eyed Leopard. He offered me his personal friendship as an apology, and I accepted out of respect for his solid reputation. Though Three-Eyed Leopard swore revenge against me, Da Fei promised to step in and help settle things between us later. Grateful for his support, I promised to treat Da Fei to a meal once my busy schedule cleared up. Over the next few days, our factory shipped out huge amounts of clothing. Da Fei accommodated our out-of-town merchants at his hotel, while I treated everyone to hearty Korean meals, leaving our buyers feeling well cared for. With our credit union loan officially approved, I met with Engineer Lee to finalize the exchange, successfully securing the vouchers for all 2,000 Westlake televisions. I transferred the profit margin, and our recent sales proceeds to Lai Xingfu, ordering 400,000 yuan worth of new clothing inventory on a 10-day credit agreement. Armed with Engineer Lee's special approval documents, I dined with the director of the department store, who guaranteed that the televisions would arrive from the provincial capital within 5 days. To celebrate and share this lucrative opportunity, I hosted a grand banquet at Bafangzhai restaurant. I invited all the key figures in my network: Da Fei, Lai the Toad, the Governor General, Monk, Shuchai, and Zhou Bin. Everyone gathered around the table, enjoying good food, drinks, and cigarettes lit by Li Xiaodong. Raising my glass, I thanked them for their support and announced that I had a new, highly profitable venture to share with everyone. Eager to make more money, Lai the Toad couldn't contain his excitement, impatiently asking what new fortune-making idea I had come up with this time. At the banquet, I presented my new business opportunity to the group. I explained that I had acquired allocation vouchers for 2,000 Westlake televisions and offered to supply the vouchers to them at 400 yuan per unit, 5 yuan below the official department store retail price. Everyone was thrilled, knowing these televisions were in extremely high demand and hard to get. Selling them with a 20 or 30 yuan markup before the Lunar New Year would easily generate massive profits. I reassured Shieldsai that the vouchers were completely legitimate, bought with my own capital from engineer Li Weiguo. Astonished by my ability to mobilize over 600,000 yuan, Da Fei, Monk, and the others raised their glasses in deep respect, eagerly agreeing to the deal. By 9 in the evening, I rode my bicycle back to the factory, escorted safely by the Governor General's adopted sons. The Governor General's past hostility toward me had completely dissolved into gratitude because I gave his boys legitimate, honest work. Back at the factory office, Lin Yuezhi greeted me, took off my heavy coat, and lovingly washed my feet while teasing me about my alcohol breath. With 4 or 5 days left before the televisions arrived, I proposed taking Lin Yuezhi back to my hometown village the next day to introduce her to my family. Though she blushed with shyness, she happily agreed. I reassured her that Li Xiaodong, Fatty Zhou Bin, and the Governor General's men could easily manage warehouse inventory and shipments while we were away. As I held her tightly in my arms, we shared a quiet, affectionate moment, feeling deeply grateful for how far our lives had come. The next morning, after making all the necessary work arrangements at the factory, I brought Lin Yuezhi with me to Fu Jianye's office at the forest farm. As soon as we walked through the door together, Fu Jianye looked at us with extreme suspicion and warily asked what I was up to this time. After securing a vehicle from Fu Jianye, Lin Yuezhi and I drove to the department store, picked up 4 peony-colored televisions, and bought several gifts. We first went to Lin Yueji's mother's home to set up her new television, antenna, and channels before having lunch. Around 6 in the evening, we drove the Jeep into my hometown village, Baegong Village. Seeing the Jeep enter the yard, my second uncle came out holding a flashlight. He was stunned when he saw me bring home a beautiful city girl as my girlfriend. Lin Yueji greeted him politely, making my second uncle beam with joy as he quickly called out my mother and second aunt to welcome us. My mother and second aunt instantly fell in love with Lin Yueji, holding her hands, admiring her beauty, and treating her like a celebrity. Lin Yueji warmly presented the clothes and gifts she had bought for everyone. We then brought in the new 18-inch color televisions. Word spread quickly, and soon over a dozen curious neighbors filled our home to see the Jeep, the televisions, and my new girlfriend. The aunts gathered around Lin Yueji on the heated brick bed, showering her with endless praise, while she answered all their questions with sweet politeness. Out in the main room, my second uncle proudly showed off to the neighboring uncles and grandfathers while I unboxed the TV. Several uncles helped set up an antenna outside. Once I adjusted the channels, the clear color display showing the news broadcast amazed everyone, drawing loud compliments from the whole room. After setting up the second television for my second uncle, the excited villagers stayed up watching TV until 11 at night. When it was finally time for bed, I motioned for Lin Yueji to sleep with me in the west room, but my mother immediately pulled her away, insisting that Lin Yueji sleep with her for the night. The next morning, after enjoying a hot bowl of hand-pulled noodles cooked by my mother, my second uncle asked if my younger cousin would be coming home for the Lunar New Year. He explained that his son was staying at his professor's house to prepare for an important research project in the capital. Hearing this, I felt relieved, knowing my cousin was still on track to become a leading heavy industry researcher. I gently mentioned that I wouldn't be able to stay in the village for the new year, because I had to manage several 100,000 yuan worth of inventory in the city. My second uncle was stunned by the massive amount of money. I reassured him that my debts were manageable and urged him to stop risking his health hunting in the freezing mountains alone. I suggested that after the snow melted, he, my mother, and my second aunt should come to the city so we could formally finalize my wedding arrangements with Lin Yueji's mother. After breakfast, I grabbed a hunting rifle, brought our 2 dogs, Da Huang and Xiao He, and took Lin Yueji up the mountain. She was thrilled to experience hunting firsthand. As we set wire traps in the snow, I patiently explained how to spot rabbit tracks and why we avoided setting snares near pregnant females. Moving deeper into the dense pine forest, I pointed out a tree grouse hiding among the branches. I loaded my rifle, aimed, and brought it down with a single shot. Xiao He eagerly retrieved the bird and brought it to us. Seeing Lin Yueji's excitement, I agreed to let her take the next shot, warning her about the heavy recoil. Soon enough, we spotted another bird in the trees. I handed Lin Yueji the loaded rifle and carefully explained how to line up the sights. She took a deep breath, aimed, and pulled the trigger. The gun fired with a loud bang, and the powerful recoil immediately knocked her backward, sending her tumbling right into a soft snowdrift. Xiao He tilted his head in complete confusion, staring at her as if wondering if that bird possessed magic. Lin Yueji sat in the snow, clutching her sore shoulder and complaining tearfully about the gun's powerful recoil. I rubbed her head with a grin, which only made her pounce on me in a play fight. Just as we were fooling around, Da Huang returned proudly carrying a dead badger. Lin Yueji pushed me aside, amazed by the creature and praising Da Huang, who proudly showed off his catch. I explained to her that it was a wolverine badger and that its oil could be used to cure frostbite. Meanwhile, Xiao He ran off to retrieve the tree grouse Lin Yueji had shot, eagerly trying to earn her favor. Realizing how much I pampered her, Xiao He clearly knew who held the real power in our household. We continued exploring the pine forest, adding another grouse and a pheasant to our basket. As I shared fun facts about badgers and their winter burrows, Lin Yueji listened with wide, curious eyes. Suddenly, Xiao He darted in front of Lin Yueji, baring his teeth and growling fiercely at the woods ahead. Da Huang joined him, his fur standing on end, as if sensing a severe danger. The cheerful mood instantly vanished. I quickly pulled Lin Yueji behind me, loaded my rifle, and scanned the trees nervously. I quietly warned Lin Yueji that if a dangerous predator appeared, she should roll down the mountain to escape quickly. When she nervously asked if it was a black bear, I explained that bears were hibernating, so I feared it might be a tiger or a pair of Amur leopards. Holding my breath, I listened to the rapid, scattered footsteps echoing through the dark pine forest. I realized we were not dealing with a single animal, but a whole pack. Since wolves had been largely wiped out years ago, I stared in disbelief as a large group of foxes suddenly burst out from the trees.